27th. I call this meeting to order. If you're able to do so, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. And City Clerk, if you could take roll call.
Member Anderson?
Present.
Member Newnenkamp?
Present.
Member Russell?
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Ward?
Present.
Member Wink? Member Woodward?
Present.
Mayor Sierra?
Present.
6 members present.
Thank you. And Member Wink did let me know that she would be out tonight.
Test.
Moving on to the first of several study session items. Up first is Director of Finance Jackie Loh here to present the January 2023 monthly financial report. Good evening, Director.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm going to review the 2023 January financial report with you. I'm going to review the report by revenue expenditures. We make a few minor changes to the report, add more information. Hopefully, it will give Council more information to make informed decisions. Through January 2023, the city's general fund revenues total $6.4 million. This amount is 10.5% of budgeted revenue, or $187,000 higher than the same time last year, or 3.0% higher than 2022. As Council's request, we subtracted one-time revenue from 2022 January and also year-to-date 2022 $1.4 million from this revenue presentation. We will not see any property tax collections. That's why in January, the number for January is 0. We will start receiving property taxes starting in February, because property taxes are due in February and April. But sales use tax remittance total $5.1 million, 13.1% of fiscal budgeted revenue, and also $453,000 higher than the same time last year. This number also includes audits and voluntary disclosure agreements received from taxpayer. That amount total to $37,000. Please note this 5.1 million sales tax is a little bit inflated. This number includes some of the December 2022 number. After the audit, we're going to adjust the number. So for 2022 December, sales tax will increase a little bit, but for January will be decreasing a little bit. So just want to make you aware. Marijuana sales tax accounts for $125,000 total sales taxes revenue. Year to date is $24,000 lower than 2022. Also want to give you an update on ARPA funding. The ARPA funding, the first report due to the Department of Treasury by April 30th. Therefore, we talked to all the departments. For 2022, the general fund still have approximately $328,000 ARPA funding reserved for homelessness in general fund. But in other fund for stormwater, water, sewer, we still have more than $1 million to be allocated. Let's take a look at license and permit. That number, we have one large permit in 2022. Therefore, you can see that line item for permit, we are $97,000 lower than the same time last year. Also, intergovernmental revenue was higher in 2022, lower in 2023 due to the timing of the January state highway user tax receipt of $75,000. And also the RTD shuttle reimbursement, we have not received the January invoice yet. So that's another reason for the lower number in January 2023. The next line item, the charge for services are higher in 2023 due to the timing of contract reimbursement for the shuttle, as I mentioned earlier. I also want to bring your attention to investment earnings, the $183,000 higher than 2022. That's, you may recall, the Fed increased the tax rate, the interest rate in February, again, now the interest rate is at a range between 4.5% and 4.75%. Because a higher interest rate will have a higher bond value. Therefore, you can see compared same time last year, we're $183,000 better. The next one is eMRF rent. We reviewed the lease agreement last Monday. You can see we are a little bit higher in 2023. Currently, we have 5 lease agreements for MRF. 3 of them are the term is, 10% at the 5th year adjustment. Other 2 is probably between 2%. We're going to have a catch up at the end of the term. So you can see the eMRF rent is a net rent. This subtract all the operating expenses and legal fees will record the net revenue in the eMRF rents. Miscellaneous, as we mentioned, higher in 2022 due to the one-time revenue received, as we noted below. This is sales use tax from the top 11 sources. We added a 2021 and 2022 actual revenue taxes receipt for your reference. And this is the past 5 years, the monthly comparison, the sales use tax revenue received, not just assessed. So you can see the dollar amount for each month from 2019 to 2023. This is 2019 to 2023 cumulative change in sales use tax collection since 2019. We have seen 8.9 million increase. This is a year-to-date sales use tax collection by area, including new businesses opened, closed, and the net. This is another way to show our sales use tax collection by area. You can see 2022 January, we had a refund, 2,486. We have not had any refund yet. But we reserved 2.1 million just in case. In terms of expenditures, the expenditure year-to-date are 3.4 million, or 5.6% of budgeted expenditures. Total expenditures year-to-date are 1.2 million lower than the same time last year. Most of the difference are due to timing. I'm going to give you more later. I would say most of the timing difference is due to across departments. We have vehicle maintenance and service charges from service center. Those have not been recorded in January due to system challenge, but we're going to record the vehicle maintenance and service charges in February. Another category is part of the variance is due to 5% salary increase for all staff. So we have 5% salary increase for all staff, and we have the vehicle maintenance service charges, internal service charges are not recorded in January. So there's why it looks like we have a favorable variances of 1.2 million compared to the same time last year. Also, 2022 debt service include 2.8 million for COP payoff, but we subtract the one-time year-to-date from 2022, 1.6 million. This is another way to review our expenditures by category: personnel, commodities, contractual services, and capital. As I said, we have not recorded the vehicle maintenance and service charges that are part of the service part of a capital, then the vehicle maintenance is a part of a contractual services. But once we record the transaction in February, those variances will even out. This is another way we show the total revenue minus one-time to show the net revenue less one-time items. Also expenditures minus one-time expenditures to show the operating surplus and deficit. So at the end of 2023, we have operating surplus 2.9 million. And compared to the same time last year, we have 1.3 million. Just remember the revenue, sales use tax revenue was inflated a little bit, and we did not have several large contractual and capital expenditures recorded in January. This is a fund transfer in and transfer out. We transfer $138,000 from PIF for the debt for an energy savings project on this building. And also last year, council approved to transfer $1 million from unassigned fund balance to fund the capital projects last year for 2023. So this is the net. And this is the fund balance composition at the end of January 2023. That change in fund balance, $2.1 million, that include one-time revenue expenditure. But I want to bring your attention to 2022 unaudited information. The net change in fund balance in 2022 is around $5 million. And then you can see the breakdown. We have $10.5 million for reserve and $8.1 million for unassigned fund balance. Like I said, we need to reallocate some of the January 2023 number to 2022. So for discussion purpose, I would probably add $500,000 to the unassigned fund balance, probably $8.6 million. But remember, last Monday, council approved $2 million, using $2 million unassigned fund balance for the Dartmouth Bridge. So 8.1 out of half, 8.6 minus 2 million, we'll probably have 6.6 million at this juncture as the 2022 year-end unassigned fund balance. This is the appendix by area. So this concludes my presentation. Do you have any questions about our January financials?
Thank you very much, Director Loh, for the presentation. Any questions from council? And Member Woodward, I'm not sure if you have a question or not, since I can't see a light, but I don't think there is one. All right, with no further questions, Director Loh, thank you very much for the presentation tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on to the second agenda item for tonight, we have Director of Parks, Recs, Library, and Golf, Director Christina Underhill, and Event Supervisor Toni Arnoldy to discuss the 2023 events. Who will be kicking us off tonight? Good evening, Director.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Christina Underhill, Director of Parks, Recreation, Library, and Golf. And with me tonight, I have Toni Arnoldy, our Events Supervisor, to give you an update on the upcoming 2023 event season. Let me get to the slides, and then Toni will go through it.
Great, thank you, Christina. Good evening, Council. We are getting ready for the 2023 events, so I'm excited to share all of what we have on the schedule so far. In 2022, we offered 17 events, and so far this year, we already have over 25 that are scheduled for the year, so we will have a full, exciting year. Some of those are listed on there. Our traditional events: 4th of July, Block Party, Silent Disco, the Holiday Bazaar, Celebrate Inglewood, Homelessness Connect, the Inglewood Markets, Summer Sunset Concerts, and of course the tree lighting. Last year in 2022, we had about 40,000 participants, and this year we're predicting over 50,000. We're gonna be able to track this better using our new Placer AI technology. It gives us the ability to geofence the spaces, track different cell phone data anonymously, and we can also go back 7 years. So this will be amazing because we'll be able to compare to different years in the past, so pre-COVID years, and see how they're kind of stacking up. These are some of the sponsors that we already have for this year's events. I'm pretty excited. So lots of familiar faces and lots of new ones. So make sure we're going to have great, awesome events with some new faces on our sponsorships, and of course the old ones returning. For the 2023 event budget, expenditures are $90,000 for 2023 with an estimated revenue of $40,000. This revenue comes through vendor fees and sponsorships. For the event marketing, we're working closely with communications. So far, we've been able to put together a shared citywide events calendar. There'll be posted signage in the community It will be promoted on the Neptune radio in all of the different centers and then at events where Neptune radio is used. Of course, through our social media, website, magazine, and flyers. We need your help. So if you can please share your events with your friends and on all of your social media. We would love it if you want to come to the events. If you want to have a booth, I would be happy to set you up a space and then brag about it. Tell everyone how much fun you had and why they should come to the next one. Any questions or comments?
Thank you, Ms. Arnoldy, for the presentation. Any questions from council? Member Noonekamp.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. This is always a fun preview of what we're going to experience for the year. It's fun seeing some new events, some returning events. Our events are something that are so pivotal to keeping the Inglewood community and character alive and keeping our small town feel. So I'm really grateful that we continue to invest in these. This seems like such a worthwhile investment. I have one question. I'm not familiar with Neptune Radio. What is the choice to use that for publicity?
So Neptune Radio is one of the outlets that we use. So if you've been in the Malley Center and the Rec Center or at Pirates Cove, the commercials are very Inglewood centered, and that's through the use of Neptune Radio. So we'll be able to pick what kind of music we want, but we're also able to create ads. So at the Cove, it can be like, hey, make sure you stop by our event on April 1st for the spring market in Acon. And of course at the rec centers. And so then if we have this at our markets, we can promote the next one or anything else that's happening for events around the city, since they go throughout the year through all different departments.
Very cool. Thank you so much. Looking forward to attending.
Thanks.
Ms. Arnoldi, I guess I have a question. I know that the DDA, the Downtown Development Authority, has been talking about certain events that they'd like to do in the future. Have you been coordinating with them in terms of just some of their ideas, or just at least have communication between the two of you in terms of what the city is planning?
Yes, of course, thank you. We have been working very closely with the EDDA. We actually have a set monthly meeting with all of them to talk about different events that they want to be part of and help enhance. And so they're going to be doing a lot with the events that are especially happening in their quadrants. So the medical district and then downtown development and then in the city center area. So working with them closely, and it sounds like that they're gonna also play a larger role in the markets that are all gonna be taking place in the city center area this year.
Very good, Ms. Arnoldi. Member Woodward.
Thank you. The Celebrate Inglewood event, was that the event down at Denny Miller Field and the police department?
It was. This year, it's gonna actually be happening here at the Circle area.
Yes, that's very successful. I thought,
Yes.
I enjoyed it last year.
All right, Ms. Arnoldi, I don't see any further questions. I want to congratulate you on just getting additional sponsorships and keeping the older ones as well. So just you pointing that out. I noticed a few new logos on there, and I know that we've spoken in the past in terms of some of the new sponsors that we had over the last few months that are carrying it over to this year. So I just want to appreciate your hard work or show appreciation for your hard work on that over the past year. So
Thank you.
all right. And with that, thank you very much for the presentation tonight, and looking forward to the events. Have a good evening. Moving on to the third item tonight, we have Division Chief David LeClaire and Director of Communications Chris Hargith. Did I see Chris, or is he online? Thought I saw his name.
Online, Mayor.
Here to discuss the media procedures between communications and police. Good evening. Not sure who's kicking us off tonight.
Mayor, are you able to hear me? Because I'll kick us off this evening.
I am able to hear you. Go ahead, Director Hargith.
Okay, I can't see the screen, so I'll assume that the slideshow is up, but there we go. I see it now.
Nope, it is not up. Hold on one second.
I'll give you a second to get our presentation up here.
Slide.
I had it turned off.
There it is.
Okay, there we go.
All right, we got it. So yeah, good evening, City Council. I'm Communications Director Chris Hargith. I'm here with Division Chief Dave Leclerc to co-present an overview of our media relation policies. So I think it's important to note, first of all, that we have two policies. Media inquiries concerning public safety are directed to the police department, and the communications department supports them as necessary. I'll give you a second there to read our mission statement. All right, Dave, you can go ahead and advance the slide, please. Some important things to note in our policy. All media inquiries should be immediately referred to the communications department. If needed, employees should provide timely, accurate, and complete information available for a response. Most reporters are working on tight deadlines. We see this in particular with the Inglewood Herald, so we try to respond as quickly as possible. And also, when possible, we try to give the media the city's subject matter expert on any particular inquiry. And I think we've seen this work well during recent media inquiry requests concerning the library cleanup, water quality issues. And in both of those instances, we gave the media our subject matter experts, and I think that worked really well. Next slide, please. And some additional things to note, when speaking with the media, city employees may not interject personal points of view. Employees should not identify as a city employee when posting personal points of view regarding matters of general public concern on social media. And next slide, please. And finally, from time to time, we do pitch stories directly to the media. All proactive media contacts like these should be processed through the communications department. And that's kind of a 30,000-foot overview of the communications department media policy. And I'm going to now turn it over to Division Chief Leclerc to talk about the police department's media policy. And happy to answer questions when he's finished.
Thank you, Chris. He already introduced me, but I'm Dave Leclerc. I'm a division chief with the police department, and I oversee support services, which oversees our media relations policy. With me is Crystal Essman, who is our crime prevention and community relations specialist, and she also wears the third hat of helping with our public information as a public information officer. So Chris was already covered it, but we do have two policies. We have the city policy, and then the police department has its own policy. Just because we have a more specific set of rules is what I use, or say that we have to go through when we release stuff. All media releases are subject to considerations that include House bills, CCJRA, which is the Colorado Criminal Justice Records Act, CORA, which is our Open Records Act, and our House bill, which was recently passed a few years ago, 1250, which speaks to this, and we'll get a little more in depth on that. The ultimate authority of our release of information is the chief of police, and he oversees all of that. We have some guidelines within our policy that's standard for all agencies on what we will release pretty much immediately, which is date, time, location, case number, the type of crime, some basic information about the crime without going into too much information initially. The reason for this is that we don't want to jeopardize any investigation or jeopardize any investigation. We want to maintain the integrity of that investigation. And then ongoing updates will be provided as soon as possible. If the slides will go here. There we go. Some of the media release criteria that whenever we get a request, we have to essentially look at several different criteria, and they don't necessarily work together really well. One of them is CORA and FOIA. CORA is the Open Records Act. FOIA is the Freedom of Information Act. People can obviously request information from us, and we will release it if it exists. We're not going to create something under CORA. So if somebody wants crime stats, we typically do that under CCJRA, even though it's a Cora request. So this is where it gets kind of confusing. And then whenever we release anything, we also have to release it under the Colorado Criminal Justice Records Act, which is another set of guidelines that is in statute as far as how we can release stuff and what needs to be redacted and when we can release it. And then lastly, the police reform bill. That pertains mainly to body camera. This is the police reform bill that was put out several years ago, and when we have to release that and under what conditions we have to release that. Core request, which I already covered a little bit. It's public access to existing records and documents. Like I said, we won't create anything. It's any emails that we have or any policies, anything that we already have in print that we control, we can release under Cora. This is simply put in by request, and we have 3 days to respond to it. We don't have to provide it within 3 days. We just have to respond to it in 3 days. We typically are much quicker than that, though. This is coordinated with the city clerk's office so that we can ensure that everything is released in a timely manner. The Colorado Police Reform Bill that I referenced earlier, this is an additional set of timelines. This typically pertains to body-worn camera footage. There's some stipulations in that as well. If we get a notice of misconduct and we need to release information, we have 21 days to do that. 45 if the district attorney wants to weigh in and delay that for reasons in line with the investigation. We have a mandatory victim notification stipulation in there that we need to contact either the victim or their family and notify them that we're releasing this prior. We give them, I believe, 72 hours notification on that. And then in that bill, there's minimal edits or redactions allowed. There's some things we're required to edit or redact, but if it falls under the House bill release, we release it in its entirety. And then some additional considerations that we have to look at is anything that's kind of put into place by the courts. So open cases, generally we won't comment on them. As I mentioned before, we want to maintain the integrity of the case. We don't necessarily want the media to interfere with the integrity of the case. Jurisdiction, if we're not the primary investigating body of it, then we won't release information on it. But if it's another agency, we'll defer to them. I'll provide an example of that. We had an incident at the high school earlier this week with a swatting incident, and we received a fair amount of requests for our audio in that, and we chose not to release that because the FBI ultimately took the investigation, and they'll be the ones that would release it because they may want to use some of the information before it gets out. And then the district attorney, once we submit a case for file, then the district attorney will make the determination on what is released. And lastly, court actions, if the gag order is put in place, sealed case or juvenile cases. So we do have some restrictions as to when we can release information. Try to provide an example of how this kind of works is that each call we have to look at singularly. I use the example of a car accident. If we have a single car accident where, unfortunately, let's say the driver dies in that accident, and it was a single car accident, it was their fault, we can pretty much release all the information because there's not an open case. It's a closed case. We can release information from there. If we change that scenario where it's still an accident, but it turns into maybe where the driver is under the influence of alcohol and maybe injures or kills a driver of another vehicle, then we're still investigating that case, and that's an open case, and then we are restricted on what we can release merely because we're still conducting the investigation at that point. And then to take it a step further is if, let's just say that driver evades police for a while and ends up in a critical incident further down the road, we then we may have more restrictions because of the open investigation, but we may have a different timeline because there may be a request that comes through a House bill where the media is requested it due to officer misconduct. So we have to look at each instance individually, and we have a panel that we review it and work to get it out in the most timely fashion that we can. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have on any of that.
Thank you very much, Division Chief and Director Hargis, for the presentation. Any questions from council? Member Noonkamp.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. I have a question about the policy, our police policy specifically. As you are obviously aware, there have been some instances in the past where there has been a request for more information than we have been able to give under our policy, especially when there's an ongoing investigation. And there have been some comparisons to us and other municipalities and how much information they release. Can you just give us a little bit of context about how our policy compares or contrasts to other municipalities around us in the region?
Yeah, yes. Our policy, from everyone that I've compared, falls directly in line, very much so with other agencies. Where it gets confusing is not knowing where that agency is in their investigation. If they're towards the end of an investigation, they may be in a position to release more information. Or if they need information for their investigation, they may use the release of information as an investigative tool. That's where you get the varying degrees. Some agencies, they may have a good lead in their investigation and choose not to release information so that they can build a better case. But because of that, sometimes you get discrepancies. It's not a one-size-fits-all, if that makes sense.
And are there examples where we might reevaluate our own policy and release additional information early for some strategic purpose, or if we were able to, we felt confident that we might actually release information early?
There's several reasons we may do that. A lot of them is public safety. If there's an ongoing threat to the community, we will release information regardless, because safety is key. We would do that over the integrity of the investigation. Other reasons may be simple. If it's a road closure or something that's not critical as far as to an investigation, then we will release that information. But everything is looked at critically, for lack of a better term. And I didn't mention this in the beginning, but we do have staff on 24/7 or on-call staff. So when we have an event like this, we begin looking at it right away. We don't wait till the next day. It's always evaluated continuously.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Member Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Division Chief Claire. My question is just in regard to doing interviews. If media contacts you and says, there's an incident and they want to do an interview on it, is there a policy around when you grant those interviews, or say no, we can't? There's nothing to release, so we're not going to interview right now. How do you make those decisions?
There is a policy. It's kind of the same litmus test that we put everything through. If there's information that we can release that hasn't been released, then we will release that. And some of it depends on the availability of somebody to be able to do an interview. If it's an ongoing incident, we can't always provide that. If it's an after-the-fact incident, then we evaluate what information we can release. If the information that we can release is already out there, we typically won't do another interview, but if there's information that we can get out there, then we will grant an interview.
Okay, thank you.
Member Woodward.
Thank you. Question on for example, a fairly simple hit and run parked vehicle or something like that, and the owner of the vehicle comes out and discovers the car has been hit, calls the police come and respond and write up a report. Are they to provide a copy of that report right then? I know what I've heard, and this is a while back, is they got a copy of the officer's card with a number on it, accident number or whatever, and that they were then told to go to the police department and get it from reports, I believe the next day or 2 days later or something like that. Is that the standard procedure, or do they can they get a report right then?
No, the standard procedure is typically the next day or later in the day. The officer doesn't prepare the report on scene. They typically gather the information, the license plate, the vehicle information, and then either later in the day they complete that report at the station. So it is not available right away. That's why you're provided a case number and then the actual report, because the report itself takes sometimes an hour or more to prepare if they're doing a diagram. So it's not immediately available. I believe the state guideline is that they have five business days to complete the report. Ours are typically completed the same day.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Division Chief, I guess I do have a question. All of this is still a little bit murky to me in terms of when exactly we can release information. Obviously, the media is going to come and ask for additional information even if we can't provide it. But I also hear from citizens that they would like more information. So do we happen to have anything that we can provide in terms of it's an open investigation, we're limited to this amount of information that we can provide, or this is the timeline that we're able to provide any information, closed cases, we're able to provide. I'm just trying to figure out how can we articulate our communication to our citizens if needed. Is it just provide your information or have them reach out to a police department in terms of what can be released? I'm just trying to figure out how to answer that question when citizens do ask for additional information on something that's going on.
Yeah, that's a great question. It is murky. I will agree with you that because of the number of factors that play into the release of information, it does appear murky. If you can include us with any request, we're happy to help decipher them. We have really bolstered our social media response where we try to get out information as quickly as we can and let the citizens know, the community know, the media know what we can and can't release. There's standard stuff that we put out that we won't comment on an ongoing investigation, and I'm sure everybody has seen that in the media, and it's frustrating. It's frustrating for us. There's times that we would like to get the information out there more quickly, but it's the investigation sometimes is going very slow. So yes, we ask that you partner with us, and we would be happy to work through it with anybody to see what we can release, because our ultimate goal is to release as much information as we can. To be transparent, to let the community know that what the police department is doing, the more we can get out, the happier we are.
Thank you, Division Chief. Mayor Pro Tem.
I have some comments, not necessarily a question. So I think what you just said resonated with me a bit, because the perception I've gotten from the community has been that the police department has information, and if they want to give it to you, they'll give it to you. And if they don't want to give it to you, you can go pound sand. So my focus relative to records that the police department holds would be to disclose as much as possible, as early as possible. And that would include things that maybe the resident's not asking for. In the most recent major incident we had that I can recall that occurred in District 4, there was an officer-involved shooting. As I understand it, that issue has still not been fully cleared or resolved by the 18th Judicial District that's tasked with investigating it. But there was information that we could have provided that we didn't. Certainly not Inglewood's first officer-involved shooting. So one example of information that we could have provided that we didn't would be how long prior investigations had taken when there were officer-involved shootings. Not a guarantee of a timeline in the current one, just an estimate of what happened previously. I think that information would have been helpful because it would have set some sort of expectation or some sort of reasonable expectation based on knowledge that we had. Whereas, members of the public could have gotten that information by filing a court request with the 18th Judicial District or filing a specific court request with the police department. You guys know that information. You deal with that all the time. So what baffled me was why we couldn't share things like a potential investigation timeline or a history of past events, or here's a copy of our use of force policy, which we have online. Helpful data points that we can release shows an attempt or an effort to cooperate with the demand for information as early and as quickly as possible. And I'm afraid I just didn't see that in that incident. It looked like we were circling the wagons and trying to release as little as possible.
Go ahead, Division Chief, if you want to respond.
Well, I would just say on that there's not a set timeline. That in this case, there's several investigating bodies on the incident that I believe you're referring to include a critical incident response investigation, an in-house investigation, district attorney's investigation. So it is not a set time. Some critical incidents, it can range from months to years, and without putting out that information, that's difficult. I do agree that maybe some direction on the use of force and is good advice, and that's something that we'll definitely take into consideration.
Yeah, I want to make sure we don't get bogged down. The focus here is to release as much as we can.
Correct.
Even if we just throw it all out there and say, this may or may not be relevant to what's going on right now, this is what we have to give you. This is our package that we assembled that gives you information, and we're willing to talk about what we can talk about. These policies haven't changed. This is what we can talk about. And on the timeline, I just want to, if I can revisit, we have critical incidents that have occurred in the past in our city. They've been investigated and closed. We know when the incident occurred and when the investigation was closed. If we assemble a historical timeline, that gives some sort of basis by which someone might at least understand this could be 6 months, it could be a year, it could be 2 weeks. But it's information that we hold that we chose not to disclose because the person didn't ask the right question. And that's, I think, what disturbs me about it.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Division Chief, anything else you wanted to add there, or move on to Member Anderson?
No.
Go ahead, Member Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor. I think there's well, I'll first start by saying, this is complicated. I understand, that there's an internal process and a panel of people deciding what information you can release when and all of that. I think on the granting interviews question, or just there's the information you can release, and then there's the information about the information, the kind of meta information maybe is what can you tell people about what you can tell them. I think that's where just granting an interview goes a long way, is even if you show up and you say, sorry, we can't talk about that yet. We want to, we want to tell you everything we know as soon as we can. We just can't talk about that. I think there's something to be said for, if you imagine the same scenario, one where the police department says, sorry, we can't grant that interview because we have no information to release. And same scenario, except this time, police department says, yeah, we'll do an interview with you, and then answers every single question with, we don't have any information that we can release on that about that, but we are, we're working on it. We'll release it as soon as we can. Those two scenarios send an entirely different message. The one where you don't grant the interview says, we don't want to talk about it. I think it makes the police department potentially look guilty or something like that, even though, maybe none of that going on. It has the appearance of circling the wagons. And the one where you grant the interview and then don't give them any information, but you say, we're open to releasing this information as soon as we can. We understand why you want the information, and just communicate all of that over and over again. I think that they'll get bored with asking you for interviews if that's all they're getting. But at the same time, you're giving them, something that they can say, okay, these people do want to actually release this information. So policy-wise, I would want to err on the side of granting that interview, and then just repeating the same line over and over, but, personal opinion. But thank you for all you do on this.
Any other comments or any other questions from council? I don't see any additional questions. So Division Chief, thank you very much. Director Hargett, thank you very much for your presentation as well. And Ms. Essman, thank you for being here as well. So thank you. All right, we're moving on to agenda item 4. We have Director of Parks, Rec, Library, and Golf, Christina Underhill, and Deputy Director of Public Works, Chris Edelstein, to present and discuss the security enhancements of the public library. That seemed to have been cut off on my section, but good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Like you said, I'm Christina Underhill, Director of Parks, Recreation, Library, and Golf. And tonight here with me is Deputy Director of Public Works, Chris Edelstein. Tonight we're going to be presenting 5 options for enhanced security at the Civic Center campus. And this is in response to some of the behaviors and incidents we've had over the last 6 months related to the library and the Civic Center campus. Our number one goal is to make the Civic Center campus as safe as possible for everyone who visits, including staff and our patrons. And I'd like to point out before we get into the presentation, there are a couple options that call out allowing both entrances to the library to be open. My recommendation is we'd like to use just the south entry for the library itself. Both entrances could be open, but the library, we'd like the one single entrance to be the south side. We have been working on a feasibility study to look at maybe making the east area between the 2 buildings our main library entrance in the future, but we're not that far in the study yet to present any of that data just yet. So like I said, our goal is to increase security and safety for all who visit the Civic Center. And with that, I'll have Chris go through the presentation.
Good evening, Council. Chris Edelstein, Deputy Director of Public Works, Operations and Maintenance. So the security enhancement, as Director Underhill went through, is to control access to all entrance of the Civic Center. So during the 5 different options, we have different options to choose from. So looking at not only just standard unarmed guards, but also the use of metal detectors. We've got overall increased. So right now we have a armed security guard in courts, unarmed here in the building, and then an unarmed covering EIF 24/7. And then in addition to the increased contract security or police presence, also taking a look at adding some environmental sensors to the 1st and 2nd floor restrooms. So with that, I apologize, white on white does not obviously show that well. There's two different of the manufacturers of the environmental sensors that we've been in contact with. So with that, they can look at not only total volatile organic compounds, smoke. They can take a look at actual noise, and if people are using an elevated voice, they can, number one, notify our camera system, so that way it can kind of flag the camera outside. We don't have cameras in the restroom facilities, let me be clear on that. They'd be outside the door, so as the individual walks out, they can kind of get a screenshot of that individual, and the technology is there to kind of follow them through the cameras inside the Civic Center. So taking a look at, again, indoor environmental pollutants and concerns. They would not be able to distinguish meth, but they could. That's where the smoke and the total volatile organic compounds come in, so they can kind of detect that. They can detect vape, so if somebody's in there vaping, and also if they're trying to use a masking agent to kind of cover the fact that they're smoking, vaping in there, it'll pick up on that as well. So option 1 is the option that we brought forward August 15th, 2022 with Allied. That's when it was approved. So again, that would be 1 armed guard for municipal courts, 1 unarmed guard for EIF, and then 1 unarmed guard for here in the Civic Center. The first 2 options, the armed security guard in municipal court and the unarmed guard for EIF, is in all of the first 4, well, actually all of the 5 options. So we're not looking to minimize this contract, it would be expanding upon that. So this total annual cost for this is $456,945. Option 2 would leave all 3 entrances to the Civic Center open to the public. We would have an unarmed guard at each of those entrances, and then 1 floating guard to make sure that the individuals get their breaks, get their lunch, and then also, in addition to, if there's any issues with the environmental sensors, not only will it trigger the camera, but it also can contact us through email. So that way we would know the location, and that floating guard would be able to respond to that location. With this option, both entrances to the library would remain open. So again, option lines 1 and 2 will be present with all of the options. So bullet number 3 there would be 4 unarmed guards for the Civic Center. Again, one for each of the 3 entrances, 1 floating. So the additional cost, or the total cost of those 4 guards would be about $406,000. The total for this option is $763,557, which is an additional $306,612 over what we currently approved in April of 2022. And also the environmental monitoring, we don't have the total cost on that. We are working on getting a demonstration set up where they'll actually install one in the library or any of the restrooms to be able to make sure it's working as we feel it is being sold to us as. So we don't have the total cost of that. Square footage of the bathrooms, there may need to be multiple sensors in there to make sure that we do have everything covered. Option number 3, this is when we're starting to implement the metal detectors. So both first floor entrances would be covered by the metal detector and an unarmed guard. Still, again, with that floating guard to be able to respond to issues and then also cover breaks for the entrance guards. The second floor garage, the entrance on this floor would actually be an employee-only entrance at this point. The entrance to the library would be from the south or garage entrance only. So again, the first 2 bullets are the same. Bullet number 3 at this point, we would not have an unarmed guard at the second floor entrance, with that being a employee-only entrance. You need your badge to be able to badge into the building. We do have the purchase of the 2 metal detectors, which would be a one-time cost with that. So the total of this option is $708,754, or an addition of $251,809 over the existing contract, and again, still with the environmental monitoring equipment in the restrooms. Option number 4 would be all 3 entrants to the Civic Center would be open to the public, adding the additional metal detector to the 3rd floor door. Again, still with the floating guard to cover the breaks and issues. And then entrance to the library, again, would be from the garage side only. The trolley entrance would not be utilized in this example either. So kind of similar to option 2, we're back up to 4 unarmed guards to be able to utilize the metal detectors and then also the brakes. Going back to the $406,000 with that. Purchasing 3 metal detectors, again, 1 for each door, that's $13,172. So the total of this option is $776,729, or an additional $320,000 over the current approved amount, and again with the environmental monitoring. Option 5 would have no change to what we're currently doing or what was approved in August. But we would be adding 2.5 police officers to the Inglewood Police Department to provide 7-day-a-week coverage inside the building. So again, we would keep the contract as it was originally, 1 armed for courts, 1 unarmed for EAF, 1 unarmed for inside the building, and then the 2 additional police officers for 7-day-a-week coverage, plus the half officer for holidays and covering sick leave and vacations. So that amount was $264,265 for a total amount on this version or option of $721,070.
And Mayor, if I could interject, I added this somewhat late in the process and failed to include the police vehicle, which the police department did note that would be needed. So that would add $95,000 to this one, but it would be a one-time cost.
With that, with SURF, we would have to put, obviously it's a 4-year replacement for PD vehicles, so it'd be $25,000 a year to be able to cover the replacement of that vehicle. So that would end up being $746 on a reoccurring basis after the initial purchase. So with that, this is kind of a layout, taking a look at the north trolley entrance. I don't think this has a laser on it, does it? Not so much. So the green at the very top of the screen, that would be the actual entrance to the library. The doors directly in front of the stairs would be an exit only or a staff entrance. So we would have those visiting the building come in where that green area is. kind of move to the left on the screen, go through the security and metal detectors in option 3. They would have access to the elevators, the one right out here, so they would be able to utilize the elevator or come up the stairs if they would like. That is the entrance to the library that would be closed under this option. And this is the garage entrance, south side, so the first floor. So again, the visitors would be coming through with that green boxes, walk forward, go through the metal detector, then they would have access to the library, also the elevator to come up to the second floor, or they could utilize the stairs. Again, the entrance is on the left-hand side as you're coming in. That would be an employee-only entrance with badge, but you would be able to exit through that, those doors as well. So with that, do we have any questions this evening?
Thank you, Director and Deputy Director, for the presentation. Member Woodward, start us off with questions.
Sorry, moving the doors to the east side, right out here beneath us, and closing down the elevator doors, or not the elevator, but the entry doors on the north side and the south side and making them exit only, and then remodeling and putting the librarian stations more in the middle. I guess somewhere along the line, I don't recall hearing that going away.
That's a good question, and that has not gone away yet. That's something that's in study right now to figure out if we're able to move the library entrance exit point to the east side. And so we're not quite there yet with that study, but that could change whatever decisions made this evening. Ultimately, if we were to go with any of these options 2 through 5, the one thing, if the library entrance is on the east side of the building, we wouldn't need the guards after hours when the Civic Center is technically closed, but the library is still open, or we have a special event going on. So there could be a cost savings down the road, depending on how the library entrance lays out. But that's later this year.
Okay, but the main point is that either we have security or we have police officers in any account. I mean, they would be there, and the alarm system, Halo system, or whatever it was. Okay, thank you.
Member Russell.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. So what, City Council got an email from a citizen about using police officers. What is Littleton doing, and how does that relate to what we're doing?
Thank you for the question, Member Russell. If I could invite, I believe, Deputy Chief Fender did some outreach to Littleton, because the information we did receive, if you could come up and address that, the information we received from the resident was incorrect in terms of what Littleton is doing, so I know he did some research on that.
Sure. Thank you for the question. I did reach out to Littleton and found out that they have, their library has a budget of $62,000 a year to pay an off-duty police officer to voluntarily sign up to work at their library for up to that amount for the year. They're trying to fill about 20 hours per week with an off-duty officer signing up for that voluntarily, and they said that they're filling about 80% of the hours that they're posting there.
So they don't have any other guards at all other than the part-time Forted?
I didn't ask about their armed guards or guards. I don't know that question. I don't know the answer to that. I just asked about their the Littleton police officer that was in the email.
Okay, so the Littleton police officer is volunteering, or he's being paid like $62,000
No,
a year?
I'm sorry, ma'am. No, it is, they're having trouble filling it the same way we are with off-duty jobs. It's a voluntary assignment that an officer would take on their own time to make overtime.
Okay.
And that's why they're only filling 75 to 80% of the hours that they're posting.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you
Yes,
very
ma'am.
much for the information.
Yes, ma'am.
Mayor Pro Tem.
why did we not propose to use armed guards at the metal detectors? It seems to me that at a station that is designed fundamentally to detect weapons, it might be nice to have one to respond to.
Yeah, we did not have that requirement. It is something that we can go back to Allied and increase the level to an armed guard.
Yeah, it looks like the difference in cost is about 25%. Given the choice between that and having someone detect the weapon and having nothing to respond to it with, I think I'd much rather have someone trained with use of armed force.
Okay, thank you for that feedback.
Member Noonan-Camp.
Thank you for the presentation and also just for all of the continued work on this. I know this is a challenging issue that we've been addressing and looking at for a long time, and we're getting closer to a reopening, which is good news for the city. I have questions about the staff proposal. I'm curious why staff is proposing number 3, although I think with the adjustment of only the south entrance, if I heard you correctly. And can you just speak more about what purpose do you see specifically the metal detectors serving in keeping the library more safe as opposed to increased security presence? And can you just walk us through what's the experience like for a patron of the library when they come to visit under this system?
Those are great questions, and a lot of thought went into all these proposals. Option 3 was evaluated heaviest from our fire marshal's office, our building officials, and multiple city staff were involved in really looking at that hard and creating those diagrams of how this would all lay out. The metal detectors would prohibit some items from coming into our facility. We see a lot of shopping carts, bikes, various items that do enter the Civic Center and the library itself, and so ultimately that would help deter a lot of those types of items from coming in to the facility, which ultimately will make it safer. And that's our number one concern is we get a lot of large bags that come into the facility, and granted we know that some of these individuals, that's their worldly possessions, that's all they have. And so there has been talk like, is there an opportunity to put lockers outside or put lockers somewhere they can lock their items up while they do visit our library or do business here at the Civic Center? And so ultimately, that's why we went with option 3, or like option 3 the best, is the metal detectors could deter people from bringing in items that shouldn't be inside this facility, and then also making it more safer. We have talked to some of our library patrons and our library board. We do have support. We have heard negative comments, that they wouldn't feel comfortable coming in if there were metal detectors. But ultimately, many have said we would feel safer. The world has changed. It's not the same as 5-10 years ago, and we'd like to see more security in place. And with the metal detector, it does still allow for strollers and wagons to be brought in. We get a lot coming in with our children's story times, and we were cognizant of that as well.
So maybe you can give me a click more detail, just so I can understand. If I'm coming to the library, I'm going through a metal detector, I'm emptying my pockets. Is someone going through my bag? If someone is bringing in maybe a large bag, are they standing and waiting while a security officer goes through an entire large bag? If they find something that's prohibited, or we saying that they can't access the library? I need a little bit more information about how it would work in practice if you're able to provide that.
Yeah, so they would come through. We would have, similar to the airport or any other checkpoint you would have, there would be a bag, kind of a thing, if it did go off, to be able to look through that. So we do have, if they would not like that they would have to turn around and not come through. So we have tried to move the metal detector up to make sure we don't have people standing outside. At least that way they're protected as we're going through. Again, staff would be coming through a different entrance, so we don't have a huge wave of traffic very frequently, but that way we would be able to move people through as quickly as possible.
So it's a metal detector for the individual to walk through, and it's a bag scanner? Is that what I'm hearing?
They can walk through with their bag to be able to go through it. So any items that they know are metal, similar to going through the metal detector here, you could pass that into a tray and then have that go through, or you could walk through and then walk through.
Right, I'm sorry, maybe I'm not being clear in my question, I'm sorry. I think all of us have money and keys and things that would set up a metal detector, so I'm assuming everyone would have to have their bag. Will someone then be checking every bag?
Yes, either it has to go through the metal detector or it would have to be checked.
But if I can clarify,
Thank you.
if there is no metal in the bag, it would just pass through and not set off the alarm.
Yep.
So we would only go through a bag if they couldn't find the item that was setting off the metal detector. But there isn't a bag pass-through like at the airport. It would just be the one metal detector, and you could walk through with no metal, or put your metals on the table, walk through, and get clear.
Okay. I'm just thinking if someone did want to bring something dangerous into the library, they pass their bag off. I want to ensure that it doesn't just get passed back and that, they're not actually being inspected if they're saying, no, I'm not going to take it to the metal detector. I just want to make sure that this is actually going to keep the library safer. My other question is one example or one option that I didn't see represented in the suggestions, and I'm curious as to why we didn't think about it, was additional security without the metal detector. So there is one where it's additional security to keep all 3 entrances open, but did you consider maybe just keeping the south entrance, closing the north and the second floor, and adding additional security to manage some of the items that we don't allow in our library? Was that considered?
I think there's a lot of options that you could go with, and so we probably had 20 up on here for y'all to pick from, and we tried to narrow it down to what the best 5 could be. That could be an option if we wanted to go that direction, if all of council agreed. No metal detectors, but enhanced security guards at each entrance for that reason, so, yeah.
Okay, it's really helpful. Thank you.
And Mayor, if I could,
Go ahead, City
to Mernunikamp's question about the experience, we've also talked about really the importance of keeping this building a welcoming facility and really training, our security guards. These are our customer service standards, that people are greeted, that people are asked, how their day is going, that it is a pleasant experience that really we don't have now. If you go to Littleton, you come into a glass room, they buzz you in if you have business in the city of Littleton. Otherwise, you don't get in. And so we think it would be a more pleasant experience than that, but with kind of the personal touch of the security guard at the door.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Member Anderson.
On option number 5, the 2 additional police officers, is this getting police to cover the entire time Civic Center, library and Civic Center is open, or are there going to be uncovered hours still?
Thanks for the question. It is just for the library hours.
Okay.
We would not be able to staff that with 2 or 3 police officers during the time period for the city center.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I guess one question I happen to have is, was there any concern about just shutting down the second, not allowing access to the second floor? It sounded like they have to go in through the south entrance in order to access the library. Was there any concern about that aspect regarding these proposals from whether it was the library board or any other members of the community? Or
And clarify, that was the south second entrance, upstairs or downstairs?
well, this is the second floor
Second,
here.
got it.
Yeah.
Just clarifying. There wasn't as much concern. The goal is we have 2 elevators and we want to have ADA access. And so that's why the first floor was primarily thought about just having those 2 entrances open and not the second floor entrance, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess the reason why I'm bringing up the question is, and I'm not sure how patrons normally access the library today. So I view the underground parking, it's just dark down there. It's not very inviting. I just wonder, do most patrons still access there so this won't be that much of an inconvenience? Or are most patrons accessing it through the second floor and then walking downstairs? So I'm just trying to understand how patrons normally access and if this is going to be a disruption to that process.
Sure, that's a good question. I want to say the majority of our patrons enter from the first floor garage entrance. The second floor entrance has primarily been used for courts.
Right, okay. Mayor Pro Tem and then Member Russell. Sorry, go ahead, Member Russell.
Thank you. So my question is, we are thinking about locking the second floor. I mean, then that impacts the courts. When I come to City Hall, I always come in the second floor. I don't park downstairs. And I have problems with locking up. I mean, this is where citizens come to do their business, not just to go to the library. And I think we need to have it open and inviting. I'm a little bit concerned about having metal detectors. And the question is, if we're allowing people to bring big bags in and all of their stuff, and we have sensors in the restrooms, when the sensor goes off, is the bathroom going to be contaminated? So we're going to have the problem anyway.
Yeah, obviously, and that's where the environmental sensors would send the email, so we would be notified. So yeah, hopefully we would curb the amount of smoke that was in the bathroom or the substance that was in the bathroom. But that is the reason for the environmental sensors, to try to prevent reoccurrence to the best of our abilities.
So maybe if we have the environmental sensors, we would know who it was that contaminated the restrooms or the building. And then I think there ought to be consequences if somebody violates the policy. They ought not to be welcome in the library. Because we can't continue to pay this amount. But I do have problems with making this look like Fort Knox for somebody to come in here. So that's one of my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, I'm on board with Councilwoman Russell on that. My question is, if our library installs a metal detector, are we the only library in the state of Colorado that has one? Where are there other metal detectors in libraries in Colorado?
Well, the ultimate goal is this wouldn't be just for the library. It's a civic center campus as a whole that these would be servicing, not just the library.
Right, but that dodges the question. If we put metal detectors in our library, are we the only library that has metal detectors, or are there other libraries in Colorado that have metal detectors?
That I'm actually not sure about. We haven't researched how many libraries have done this. I know a lot of college campus libraries have installed such devices, but as far as public libraries are concerned, I'm not aware of others. There might be some, I'm just not aware of them.
And I'll just mention, thank you for the question, Mayor Pro Tem, that we have not, had time to research what every city is doing. We're trying to do what's best for Inglewood and the safety of our citizens and our employees. Member Nunnekamp, did you know of another library? I saw you shaking your head.
I was pretty sure that Denver Public Library had that, but I was going to fact check myself. I might be wrong.
It's been a while since I've been to Denver, but I don't believe they do. They have a security station at their main branch, but the last time I was there, they didn't screen. They just watched people come in and go through. The reason why that's relevant to me is I do not want to be the first library in the state of Colorado that installs metal detectors. It's important to me. I want to maintain a safe and orderly environment. There are more ways to do that than metal detectors, but I'm okay with screening in City Hall. Unfortunately, our library is attached to City Hall, so a library to me serves a different function than the Hall of Government does.
Member Anderson.
I have similar reservations about the welcoming feel of the library. If we install metal detectors, everyone has to get screened. Hey, if reality is what it is, and that's what we have to do, that's not. I can see my way there potentially. What I would rather do is, okay, we have a level of security that's not currently functioning well for us. We need to raise that level of security up. Do we need to go from where we're at all the way up to metal detectors? Or could we raise it raise it up a level, and whether that's the security guards or the police or something like that, and reevaluate down the road and say, hey, is this working? Is this working for us? And if the answer is yes, then we've solved our problem. If not, then we can, if they've had multiple incidences where they were glad they had the police there, but it could have been much worse, then okay, we need to raise that level of intensity up again. But I would be more inclined to take it one step at a time and go towards an enhanced security that doesn't involve the metal detectors until we've tried something that's less kind of invasive to the library experience, I guess I would say.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Russell.
Thank you. So what would happen if we put security guards at each door and not really change the configuration of anything right now? I mean, if we do that, that's increasing the level of security, and I'm not necessarily saying armed guards. Although, do we have an armed guard on duty during the day? Do we have any armed guards on duty during the day?
Courts does.
The courts do?
Yeah.
So would they be available if there was a issue?
I would say they would still be covering courts unless Deputy Chief has a different opinion.
I'm not sure what their post orders are at the courts, so I don't know if he would be able to respond to a situation or not. I'm not even sure if I think they're on the same radios as the rest of Allied, I believe, but I'm not certain of their post orders.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I do have a problem without, I mean, if we have to call, or if a security guard has to call the police for help, that may be too late by the time they get here. So I think that's problematic.
So option 2 would be unarmed guards at the 3 entrances with no change. As Member Ward brought up, if we wanted to move to an armed guard, we could do that.
Mayor Pro Tem, don't see the light on, but I see
I
your
just
mic
wanted
on.
to go on record. I would support adding an additional floating armed guard to City Hall. My understanding is relatively limited, but I believe that we have an armed guard guarding the courts because we have a metal detector at the courts, which goes to the point that I was trying to make earlier. But I have no objection to adding an additional armed guard who can move throughout City Hall and the city center complex at will.
Mayor Pro Tem, and I guess I'd open this up for the 3 that have spoken so far. Is that option 4 on the presentation, or is this a separate option that wasn't provided? I'm bouncing back and forth between the 5 options, so.
All of the options provided support additional unarmed security. I'm suggesting that we should, in addition to those, potentially consider adding or enhancing with at least one of those people being armed.
Right. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I'll go ahead and weigh in. I am in favor of option 3. I've never been a fan of metal detectors, but Director Underhill, I think you stated it correctly, is that we're living in different times now. And I keep thinking, I know that I understand where members of council are coming from in terms of just the feel of metal detectors. But anytime I go to a Rockies games or a Nuggets game, I have to walk through metal detectors. I don't think it messes with the feeling of going, or the feeling of entering through a metal detector doesn't affect how I feel when I'm in the game in terms of it dropping down the it doesn't affect the way that I feel when I'm inside of a game. So I don't think it actually dropped the level at all by going through a metal detector. But I do understand where members of council are coming from. So I would be in favor of option 3. I also wanted to weigh in terms of, I know she's not here tonight, but Member Wink also was in favor of option 3. We received an email earlier today from, was it from you, City Manager Lewis, or? But we received an email earlier today about option 3. I'm not sure how members of council feel about that, but she did like that 3rd option. So, any remaining members want to weigh in? Member Noonkamp?
I have another question before I weigh in. Do we have an ETA on when we think we might get the cost for the monitoring services? I know that we're still waiting. Do we have any idea when that might come? And the reason I ask is, I think the security of this building and our library specifically is really important, and it's a little bit hard when we can't see all of the aggregate improvements that we're making. We're doing some staffing and some security and then some monitoring. It's helpful to know is we're making also big budgetary decisions that are going to be year over year to get a sense of how much we're committing ourselves to.
Yeah, we're waiting on the demo unit. So as soon as we have that demo unit, they'll come take a look at, again, the size of the square footage of the rooms will determine. So I do not have that estimate, or we don't have that lined up for them to bring that to us at this point.
But do you know, is it one-time cost or is it ongoing, what we're looking at?
It's going to tie into our camera system, so I would assume it's going to be a one-time cost for the purchase of all of the items, and then after that, it rolls into our normal camera system, security camera system.
Okay, that's really helpful. This one is hard, right? And I think that this is a big change, and the comments from my colleagues about specifically the feel of our library are very well taken. I think we have a picture of what we want the library to be, a place where families and individuals can come and be and gather and learn. And this is a different feeling. I also, though, acknowledge that, as the point was very well pointed out, that this is not just about the library, it is about our entire Civic Center, anyone who's coming to do business at the Civic Center, and the different places that we have metal detectors. And while it would maybe make us the first library to have metal detectors, we actually will not have metal detectors in our library. We will not be the first government building or the first city hall to have metal detectors. That's actually quite common, and that's what we're talking about. And so while I hear the concern, and I think it's valid if we were only talking about our library, there's like a bigger context that we're discussing. I think if I had my complete choice, I would probably be somewhere similar to Member Anderson. I would love to maybe not start here. It feels like a big change, but if this is what we think is absolutely necessary to make this building as safe as possible, I can get there.
Thank you, Member Nooncamp. Member Woodward, did you want to weigh in?
Yes. Yeah, I think what I'd like to see is option 3 without the metal detectors, but with at least 2 of the guards being armed, meaning possibly the floating one is armed and one of the guards at one of the entrances is armed. I think City of Arvada, at their city building, which is also their police building and their court building, I know all their guards are armed or in the past have been armed. So I think the metal detectors is just a little much. I imagine some little kid coming in with his bag and he has his truck and his front end loader and stuff like that in his bag, and it's all being taken out and looked at. And it just isn't that friendly feel that I would like to see at the library at a public place. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Woodward. Member Anderson.
I'll just weigh in a little more detail here. I think I'm similar to Member Woodward and probably Member Ward as well, as to add an armed guard to the mix with, if, especially, if we're not doing metal detectors. I gotta say the guards here, you walk, they're so friendly. The allied guy, they're doing such a great job. You walk in, you feel like greeted by a friendly person and also safer. And I think taking that same thing and adding to it will improve things. I gotta say I'm tempted by option 5, even though it's just having the one Inglewood police officer here. I think there's something, our cops are they're friendly, they're part of the community. So just having that presence is to me the opposite experience of a metal. A personal presence of somebody is their job, is they're there to protect you. That changes the whole thing from being, oh, what am I? I'm walking into a scary place to I'm walking into a friendly place where people are watching out for me. So I could go either way, whether it's the police officer or an additional armed guard. Like I said, the allied guys they've been so great that I'm confident they would do well as well.
Thank you for the clarification, Member Anderson. Member Russell, before I get to your comment, just a question: does the pricing change if there's an armed officer? Obviously, we don't have that pricing available, but
Yeah, the price for a armed guard is higher. I could get that amount to you, but it is higher.
Thank you, Deputy Director. Member Russell, go ahead.
Thank you. So, what would happen if we add one additional armed guard and then perhaps a police officer? Is it possible to get one police officer over here at different times so we don't have to have more coverage on an armed guard? I mean, I think, I guess what I'm thinking is just even an unarmed security guard at all the entrances and one extra armed guard besides the one to the court will provide a sense of security if an issue happened, I mean, in the library where somebody had pulled a knife or things like that. That's why I do think we do need an armed guard. But we are sending a message. If we put in metal detectors, I know we bank at Bank of the West, and the bank over on Colorado Boulevard at Yale, they had 2 or 3 bank robberies in 1 year. This was about 10 years ago. And they put up bulletproof glass all the way around. Probably 5 or 6 years later, they took it down because people weren't coming to the bank anymore. It didn't feel safe. And I think by just the security guards and at least one extra armed guard or a police officer, I think that would be helpful, and then go from there. I mean, if it is not safe, then we would need to do something. But let's not throw everything at it at once. Let's just see what that would do. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. Actually, Deputy Chief, just a question for you, just because I do like option 5, but one of the reasons why I didn't really consider it was just what we heard over the past, couple years is just your department is short-staffed and there's, and it happens for many different reasons, whether they were injured on the job or just whatever happens to be the reason. And my concern with option 5 was just that we're taking resources away from, police officers off the street to have them specifically here. So I'm not sure if you want to weigh in on option 5 and how you agree with that option or any additional context.
That's a long answer potentially, but I think the short answer of it is if we were to add 2 to 2.5, 2 FTEs, two additional police officers, we wouldn't be able to give the level of service to the rest of the city until we were fully staffed to get those officers into the library. I would look at it much like the SRO position, for example. I would look at it like that, where our SRO is assigned to the schools, obviously, and gives the school what one FTE can give the school, but when there's training or other calls for service, or they make an arrest or something of that nature, then they end up having to leave the school and do their job there. So we could get there. Obviously, we could absolutely get there at some point. Fingers crossed. But yeah, and it's a sticky wicket in terms of one police officer being assigned here wouldn't give you 40 hours a week of a police officer due to those, paid time off and holiday leave and training and all of those things. So does that answer your question?
It does, Deputy Chief. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And so, actually, I'm going to leave it either to the city manager or director because I'm still a little muddled. I think what I'm hearing consensus on is that there is increased security, but with at least one armed personnel within the city center area. But I'll let you just see if we have consensus on where to move forward with this.
Thank you, Mayor, and feel free to interject if anybody or interrupt me. But what I heard was 3 in support of option 3 with the metal detectors, so that one is out. What I heard, I think, from a majority, unless, Member Anderson, you were changing to option 5 instead of option 2 or 4, but if you kind of, from what you first said, I think I heard 4 that are comfortable with 3 additional security guards, and then I think 3 people who stated they'd like for one of those to be armed. So I think the only question now is, do we add an armed as one of the 3? And so maybe that would be the only feedback we're lacking, unless I misrepresented that.
Go ahead, Member Noonan-Kemp, because I know that you didn't specifically state that, but go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna maybe add a wrinkle, so I apologize. I'm not trying to make this more difficult than it needs to be, but I actually would support during the day if we need to close the second floor entrance. I like it being open when we have a city council meeting, so we have access for those folks. But during the day, I think that the elevator access from the north and south lobbies makes it accessible enough to get to the second floor for city business or for court business, which might be also cost savings for us if we were then able to just have the 2 security guards at each entrance on the first floor and then the additional armed guard, making that a total of 3 versus 3 plus an armed. So that's a consideration.
Thank you, Member Noonkamp. Not sure if it really clears up the waters, but
It would save the
It would, yeah.
dollars in terms of 1 additional guard, certainly.
go ahead, Mayor Pro Tem.
I'm not interested in that option. I do not want to leave the second floor unguarded with an armed guard at his post at the courts, unable to move around and respond to whatever occurs on the second floor. So I would prefer just to leave option, was it 4, as it is without the metal detectors for right now. And obviously, we can adjust as time goes on if we need to make adjustments or additional information comes in that we've asked about tonight. We can look to make some changes.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So that's option 4 without the metal detectors.
That's option 2, with the floater being an
Oh.
armed guard, is what I'm understanding.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem, the option 4 does modify the access points. So I think what you're saying is don't modify the access points and have a security guard at all 3 entrances.
Yes, thank you for that.
Okay, so that's option 2. Go ahead, Member Anderson.
If I thought I heard enough interested in 1 armed, so the modification to option 2 would be one of the 4 would be an armed. Okay.
Yeah, it would be 3 unarmed for the doors, 1 floater that was armed, and then covering for breaks and things like that.
I'm supportive of that.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Did you say 1 unarmed floater or armed?
1 armed floater,
Okay.
3 unarmed for the entrances.
Okay, thank you.
Member Woodward, did you want to voice your opinion on that option? Whether you would be in support of that or not, without the metal detectors?
I am in support of that, going ahead with option 2 with the 1 unarmed or 1 armed floater and then the others unarmed. I think that's good. The floater then is somebody's, in theory, always around.
Member Russell?
I'm in support of that. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have consensus now. Member Noonkamp?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to have my light on. I do have another question, but we can get to consensus first if we need to.
Okay, I think we have consensus that there's at least 4 that are in support of option 2 with the armed floater. Yeah, so I think that we have 4 in support. Go ahead, Member Noonkamp.
I just had a question for Director Underhill, because I want to ensure that if we move forward with this, that it's going to at least initially solve some of the concerns we have. So to your point earlier about shopping carts and bicycles and things that are being brought into the library, are those items currently against our standards of behavior for what can be brought into the library?
Those are currently against the standards of behavior.
So the security guard at the entrance would actually be empowered to say, I'm sorry, you can't bring this in?
Correct.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, go ahead.
Yeah, before we wrap up, I just wanted to say that my recommendation is based largely on the experience with Allied thus far. I'd like to echo Councilman Anderson's comments. I've been very satisfied with what I've seen. I think they are doing a good job of maintaining order or restoring order. I know it's a slow process, but it seems to be going well to date, so I've been impressed.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Russell?
Thank you, and I echo those same sentiments. I greatly appreciate Allied. Have we thought about consequences for people bringing contraband into the library? I think it's important to have those in place also, those rules.
So we do have the standards of behavior, which does call that out. And I don't know if Toni Niles can speak to what those consequences could be. I mean, we can more or less trespass somebody for 45 up to 90, even longer, if they are caught with contraband per se. But if you want to take it.
Yes, I'm happy to weigh in. We actually have a pretty long list of level 1 violations and level 2 violations that prohibit different conduct, level 2 being the more serious violations. And then we also have a ramping up of the time of the trespass. And so we thoroughly researched applicable law to make sure it was legally compliant. We are confident it's a good, solid procedure to use. So a level 1 violation may be something like raising their voice and using profanity. And then if we ask them to stop, they don't, then we could eject someone immediately for 24 hours. And then we could also, depending on the severity of the offense, then exclude the person for, say, 30 days. I don't have it in front of me. It's a very detailed document. I believe we have it posted at several places in the Civic Center as well. Something like that, I wouldn't think someone would be trespassed for that, but let's say if it's happened a couple times, they keep doing it, staff has discretion to then remove them. Now, if there's something more serious, let's say a weapon in the library, or they committed a crime in the library, then we can ramp up the time that they are excluded from the library, as well as the number of offense. Then we can go up to 180 days to exclude someone.
I appreciate that, as long as there are consequences. And there are certain things that would be considered criminal activity, which they could be arrested for. Is that correct?
Yes, and in fact, that does happen at the library. We had an incident that comes to mind fairly recently where one patron pushed another patron. The police were called. The person was ejected from the library. They were excluded for a period of time. And then they were also cited for the criminal violation because, of course, you can't touch anybody.
Okay, thank you, because I think that is a deterrent also. Thank you.
All right, with no further comments, staff, thank you very much for your work on this. I'm happy with all the options that you provided. I'm glad that we're not going to be looking to do the status quo moving forward with this. So I just appreciate all your work that you've done on this over the past few months and bringing this to our attention. So thank you. All right, everyone, we're going to take a short break. I think we're about 3 minutes ahead, so if we can get back here around 7:47, and we'll start up again. Thank you.
Test. Oh, it's muted, though, because everything's muted during that thing.
Members of council, if you could please be seated.
Check 1 2, check 1 2. Jim, can you hear? Check, test.
Testing 1 2 3 4.
Test. Test 1 2. Test check.
I think I can.
Hello. Can you hear
If
me?
you think it isn't working,
And I've turned this all the way up. Yeah, what?
We're just giving Member Russell a minute before we get started. All right, we'll go ahead and begin. We're now up to item 9, the Unified Development Code revisions. We have Mr. Sampson, Planning Manager Brian Isom, Matt Ashby from Ayers Associate, and Mr. Brewster from Multi-Studio here with some members of the Inglewood Historical Preservation Commission to review the remaining portions of the Unified Code revisions. So Mr. Isom, if you want to get us started.
Thank you, Mayor. This is so far the 6th study session that we've had going through the Unified Development Code. This study session touches on some of the remaining chapters that we haven't seen yet, such as signs, historic preservation, and definitions. You see telecommunications up there, but that's being revised through a separate process with the city attorney's office, so we really won't cover any information with that tonight. But with that, we'll let Chris go through a very quick presentation so we can open it up to questions from council.
Thank you, Brian. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Chris Brewster with Multi-Studio, the lead consultant on this project. I have a quick presentation to orient us to things you've discussed in the past. As Brian mentioned, our 6th meeting, and we'll be coming back with the 7th to kind of wrap up the work sessions. There we are. So the next slide, please. As a reminder, this is the overall framework of all of the chapters. Again, all of these are in your current code. They're just being slightly reorganized. We've talked about them under the 4 main topics that are there on the right side of the screen, which is what our technical committee and the steering committee has dealt with in tying the code to your major policies and issues. Next slide. As Brian mentioned, this is sort of the cleanup session where we hit all the chapters that needed to be updated or revised for whatever reason, but didn't necessarily fit directly under any of those topics. So I'll go through those briefly and just turn it over to questions as well. So next slide. The first one is Chapter 9, Signs. It's currently a subsection of your design standards, so we are giving it a little bit of an elevated status of it with its own chapter, but it's because it has some unique issues that are unique to signs. Our objective was we haven't heard any issues or problems with the sign code and the substantive standards itself. Signs were not necessarily a pressing issue in the community from community design. So it told us that the standards are roughly about right. So most of the things we're reorganizing and simplifying with no significant substantive changes. It doesn't mean the way we approach things won't have some slight differences, but overall we aren't planning any major changes. The first 2 things we did was to remove some of the detailed permitting sections from the code for 2 reasons. One, to delegate that to more of an administrative permit process internal to staff, or 2, in Article 1, we dealt with a lot of the permitting and fee procedures that go with all applications in chapters 1 and 2, that were sort of redundant of what you had for the sign section. So those weren't necessary or crucial. The second thing we did was we simplified some of the exempt signs, those signs that are exempt from a permit or exempt from the standards. There are things that are more routine. And what we did was to clean up some of the things, mainly removing things that were more content-based, that present some legal challenges based on recent case law. So we generalized some of those. An example would be in temporary signs in particular, you had a bunch of signs that indicated for sale sign or garage sale sign or things to that effect. And so those are better referred to as just a temporary sign, a yard sign, or something to that effect that doesn't have any content associated with it. So there were a few instances of those types of things, mainly in the signs that were exempt. And so that's where the simplification came in. The biggest change was reorganizing all the signs that are permitted, what the signs you're allowing. You had sort of a long list of different sign types that can sometimes overlap. And so we grouped them under those 4 main categories: ground signs, building signs, pedestrian signs, which is the one that's sort of a broader catch-all for a variety of different signs that you might find on a building or site, and then temporary signs. And all of those, your current code has an allowance, particularly for the ground and building signs, based on the lot frontage. So it's scaled towards your lot or building size, and that continues over under this code. So that's where most sites will roughly end up with the same amount of signs being enabled, and they will just allocate their sign budget to one of these 4 types. It makes it a little bit easier to interpret and apply than worrying about whether a sign is an awning sign or a marquee sign. It's going to fit one of these categories. The major difference with the pedestrian sign is we're gearing that as signs geared towards people that are engaging the building and site on foot. So it doesn't mean that it's just about walkers, period. But as you park in a parking lot and approach a building, you'll see a lot of signs that you won't see as you're driving down the street. And it's those types of signs, the smaller scale signs, that are in that pedestrian sign budget. And then we feel like we've given a little bit more flexibility for signs in that regard. The last element of the sign code update was you have a number of standards that deal with either the design or construction and maintenance of the signs on property. And so we broke those into 2 different types of standards. One, the things that are general to all signs. So those would be things like maintenance, public safety standards, lighting standards, and then signs that might be specific to a certain sign type. We had a number of unique things about signs on buildings, particularly the signs that are on the upper marquees of your taller buildings. So we kept some of those specific things in there that applied only to certain types of signs. With that, I think that covers most of the changes. I'll pause for any questions if anyone has on signs.
Any questions for members of council? Member Anderson.
Are there, or thank you, Mr. Brewster, are there standards for signs for home-based businesses? I know in accessory uses in our old code, there was a section on home-based businesses that allowed for signs 1 square foot in area. I don't remember seeing home-based businesses in what we've talked about at study sessions so far. Maybe I missed it, but is that in, I mean, it seems like sign, that should be a part of the general sign code, not in a separate place, but wanted to see what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, I don't have it off the top of my head, but I'll make a note of it to get that question answered for you. I will say that our intent was not to change anything that you currently have regarding that topic. So we would approach it that whatever a residential property is allowed for a sign, and it might be whether it's a business or not, there's certain allowances that residential properties can have. Typically when it goes with, if you have an accessory business or not, we'll key the standard towards those specific accessory use conditions. And so that would be in chapter 4. So I'll go back and check that section as well. But overall, our intent was not to make a substantive change. So if we have missed it, we will go in and add back in what you currently have. But I don't think we did, but I'll just double check and confirm that.
Very good, thank you.
It looks like Mr. Isom has the answer. Go ahead, Mr. Isom.
So it would be in the accessory use standards of chapter 4. Signs shall be limited to 1 non-illuminated sign, no more than 1 square feet, and within at least 10 feet of the primary entrance, except no signs are permitted for home occupations in the R1A district.
One less action item for you, Mr. Brewster. Member Woodward.
Thank you. In looking at going to works of art, and specifically I'm thinking murals under number 2 there. It starts out with murals shall be located on building walls only. I know I've seen them, murals, and they're beautiful murals on retaining walls and fences, and I'm just wondering if that can be expanded to that. Actually in places that can be seen from the right of way.
Yeah, I think it certainly could. I'm fairly certain that section might be again in your current code, because it is a situation where we weren't seeking to make any changes. But I do see your point that there may be instances of where it could be on a non-building structure and have the same or similar effect.
Okay, yeah, I think it is coming from our present code under K there. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that and suggest adding that. Thank you.
Any further questions on signs? Member Russell.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation One of the questions, is somebody going to go through here and make all of the changes that, I mean, there are typographical errors, and some of it could be dictating, and the computer generates a word that doesn't really go there. Like one of them is, it says, in general, the temporary sign allowance is comparable to what would be allowed under these prior standards, but errors on a more generous allowance for situations where having multiple signs is reasonable and common. I think it means errors. And then in another place, there's a word that says meeting, and I think it should be meanings. And so will somebody be going through all of that?
Yes, we will be doing that for the code itself. I think the document you're referring to is our section maps, and those are our sort of our documents that are bridging the current code to this code. So they're more notes and they won't survive after this. So that's more of a factor of we were sloppy in our notes and drafting, but those won't be part of the code. But overall, the code will be edited for typos and things like that as well before it gets to adoption.
Right, thank you, I appreciate that. And then, Ian, the one thing, and I think that was brought up a couple of minutes ago about you didn't really intend, let's see, this is back in the beginning, where it says, although no substantive changes are intended initially in the course of simplifying and ensuring a content-neutral sign code, some changes in outcomes could occur. And I mean, it's possible that we wouldn't see those changes until it becomes in effect and somebody comes up with an issue.
Yeah, and I can give you an example of what that was written for, and that would be in the temporary sign section, particularly because we have generalized. That's the one where we erred on the side of being more generous. So, for example, you're given a temporary sign budget based on your lot square footage, and then or lot frontage distance. I'm sorry, it's scaled towards your lot, and then because we aren't deciding whether that's a for sale sign, a garage sale sign, or a political sign, or it may be any three of those, we allow a greater quantity of signs even though you're within that budget. So you could see an instance where maybe slightly more temporary signs are allowed, but that's simply to accommodate for those situations where a number of those things could be going on at one time. We've still kept the sign budget relatively in scale with a person's property frontage, but there could be some differences that would result in that case. There may be others. The other area where there was some consolidation was in the pedestrian signs, grouping those all into one category, even though those are permanent signs. A similar issue might arise with as with the temporary sign. So if someone elected to put one pedestrian sign on their awning, another one at the entrance to their business, and then maybe they had a third that was a sandwich board sign that they put on the sidewalk. We have different rules for each of those sign types. So we didn't necessarily go through and check that there was a one-for-one equivalence of those because we added some flexibility in.
Okay, thank you. And just one other question, because political season is coming up. Were there any changes really to political signs and placement of political signs, like in the right-of-way?
What I'll answer it no, in terms of other than we've generalized it and we don't have any standards geared specifically towards political signs. So they are all temporary signs. So it's regardless of what the content is on it. With this more specific question of signs in the right of way, we are not allowing any signs in the right of way with two exceptions. One would be if a part of your building projects into the right of way, you can put a building sign in the right of way. So it's a limited license that the building extends over the right of way, such as an awning or a marquee. Or that sandwich board sign that I mentioned, a temporary sign that's put in the pedestrian areas of that you often see in walkable neighborhoods. Other than that, private signs generally shouldn't be in the right of way, and so we've taken the tack that temporary signs should not be as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any further questions or comments on signs? Mayor Pro Tem.
Did I hear you correctly that the proposed changes echo what's currently in code? I'm not familiar with any restrictions on the number of political signs I can put in my yard currently. And it looks like this would potentially restrict that based on square footage.
Yes, I might have to do a little bit of research on what your current approach to temporary signs are, or political signs are. But the one change we did make was to not single out a political sign. If your intent was to try to be more lenient with political signs than you are with other temporary signs, that's when your ordinance would run into problems. You can't do that because you're distinguishing based on content. And so those types of ordinances are generally thrown out. And so we took the tact of, we will have the same limit to all temporary signs. I don't believe, I think our overall allowance of the sizes, we did do a math check, is fairly comparable. I'll have to get back to you on your question on the limit of the number of signs.
Yeah, what concerns me the most is political signs because of the compelling governmental interest standard. For a First Amendment issue involving political speech, that is a very, very high standard. But for any other, or virtually any other form of speech, the standard is much lower. So I would consider, despite the fact that it separates political speech from other speech, separating those out, because the Supreme Court has established, as I understand it, different standards based on the compelling governmental interest. I don't know if our city attorney has anything to add on that. Am I chasing the right dog here, or am I completely on the wrong street?
Well, the city manager and I were just discussing Reed versus Gilbert, or Gilbert v. Reed, which was a Supreme Court case regarding regulation of political signage. And for the legality of any provisions proposed, our office is going back through after council gets guidance, and then we will carefully review all of the applicable case law, including Gilbert and its progeny, and make sure that we do comply with regulation of signage, including political signage, because as you point out, we have to be very careful in how it's worded with case law now.
Then I won't belabor the point. Thank you.
And we'll also follow up on a comparison specifically to what your current code says on political signs as well, to confirm whether it's a limit or an unlimited too.
Thank you.
Any further questions, comments from council? All right, Mr. Brewster, on to the next section.
Okay, the next slide should show chapters 11 and 12. As Brian mentioned, those are either being done by others, or we're going to turn over some of the provisions on historic preservation to a follow-up discussion after this. So I'll hold that to the next part, and I'll just jump to the next slide for us, which is chapter 13. The key changes here are strengthening the break between, this is definitions, defined terms, so things where we have an interpretation question of what the code means, we will come to this section. Your current sections do break it between description of uses, so things that you're describing, not necessarily defining, so you're describing the quality or operations or things of a use to help interpret that use table that we discussed with chapter 4, or definitions, things that we define that has a specific meaning. The problem in your current code is the uses appear in both. So it creates a little bit of overlap and redundancy, or possibly some interpretation conflicts if they don't both match up. So our biggest change is simply to make sure we separate those, and anything that's in the use table will be in the description of uses. So it won't necessarily be a hard and fast definition, but it will be how we interpret uses. And the reason we wanted a little bit more flexible is uses evolve and change. And as we talked about with chapter 4, we're trying to be more flexible. So those sections in the draft are currently updated to match the use table that we reviewed with chapter 4. So if you have any questions on those, we will be happy to answer them or discuss them tonight. The definitions, the things that are defined terms, what's in chapter 13 right now are just what's remaining of your current definitions. when we get to a recommended adoption draft, we always save those definitions to last. We'll go through and cull the current code to make sure those terms are actually used in the code, and if they're not, we will remove them. And we will also add in new terms where the definitions need to be adjusted. So none of that has been done yet. So the section that was in Chapter 13 that you may have reviewed just reflects your current sections as they are now. So that's a later step that we know we have to do. But the uses themselves we have updated. So I'll pause there to see if there's any questions on either the substance or the approach in Chapter 13.
Mayor Pro Tem, you had your light on, so, okay. We'll start with Member Russell and then Member Anderson.
Thank you. So my question is, like on definition of uses, under residential uses, are those definitions of household living the same as what we have in our current code, or have we changed those definitions?
Let me catch up and get to those for a moment. I believe those are the same definitions because your code approach is a little bit more unique in that you've taken a tact of describing the residential uses very generally, so household living and group living. So those should be the same or similar. All of the differences we've made has been through our discussions of the building types and building configurations of single unit, a multiple unit, or the larger residential building types. So I believe those definitions should be the same. I don't recall making any specific changes to that.
Okay, so the one question I have is especially one unit dwelling, and I think this is probably what it is. I looked to see, it says a residential building designed for one primary dwelling unit. One unit dwellings include variations based on the lot size. So have, in the current code, do we define things pretty generally?
So the part you read about one unit dwellings include variations based on lot size, that's in there to create a reference back to that the table for Chapter 5 where we distinguish when we're distinguishing between the 9,000 square foot lot, 7,200 square foot lot, 6,000, 4,000, and 3,000. So those are specific types of one unit dwellings in Chapter 5, and so that's what that section is that sentence is referring to. I'm trying to pull up your current definition of household living here to get you a more direct answer.
I mean, it does define household living right above that. It's a bullet point underneath that where one unit dwelling is defined.
Right. Yeah, your current code does have that same bullet point up above. And then it has specific use types of live, work dwelling, manufactured home park, multi-unit dwelling, one unit detached dwelling, which is similar to what we just read. But it doesn't include that additional explanation of it having variations based on lot size. So that was just added in to tie back to Chapter 5.
Okay, and so tying back to Chapter 5, I just want to make sure we're still going to have in the definitions R1A, R1B, R1C, R2B, and R2C. Is that correct, or are we going to change those in rewriting the code?
Those will all still be in Chapter 5, distinguishing what types of dwellings can go in which district, correct?
Okay, thank you.
Member Anderson.
So my first question is on just trying to understand where some uses fit in this in the different residential uses. So we don't have, I don't believe in Inglewood we have really much in the way of permanent supportive housing, transitional housing, or single room occupancies, but these are all kind of modern, like newer than our old, the code we're modifying, kind of uses that are specifically related to homelessness and affordable housing. where would each of those different, I think maybe I can figure it out with permanent supportive housing and transitional housing. Those are typically more like apartments, but does single room occupancies fit into one of these categories?
Yes, so the current code you have has it as a boarding or rooming house. And so we did a comparison of where those were allowed and what that definition was. And typically a boarding or rooming house is that single room occupancy, and it's usually larger buildings. However, your current code lists that as being limited to 2 to 4 guest rooms. And they have to be lodging longer than 30 days. So that's a current definition. So what we did with that was to, as you mentioned, generalize that into that's a single room occupancy, whether it's a small building like your current code has or a larger building is a building scale issue. So we wanted the definition of the use to be based on that whole idea of you're renting just the room, you're sharing the cooking facilities or common areas of that building.
And where are those allowed currently?
We're getting back to chapter 5, so let me try and pull up my version here. Or Brian, I don't know if you have it handy, or chapter 4 and 5. I'm sorry. Let's see. Okay, so I have it. So for the smaller, the 2 to 4 unit boarding house, that's the single room occupancy, it's a conditional use permit in R2 and up, and that reflects your current code right now. The boarding house, which might go in a larger building, so 5+ rooms, is currently not addressed in your code at all. And so when we were talking about chapter 5, that was one use that we added, and we added it into the MUR3 districts and the M districts, since those already allowed similar scaled building types and similar scaled multi-unit residential types. It seemed that was a common fit. So it would be a conditional use in MUR3 and the M districts.
Okay, now we're going to have a time for discussion, right, once we get through everything. Okay, so I'll kind of leave it there for now.
Member Noonan-Camp.
Just picking up on that piece, I have a clarifying question. I see that for the boarding house general, it can be owner occupied or occupied with a resident manager, but for the smaller, the boarding house limited, it's only owner occupied. Do you know why we have that distinction?
I think it is because that's in your current code for that boarding house, the small one. That's the only boarding house your code currently has. So when we did add the larger scale one and we put it in more of the mixed use and multifamily districts, we put it towards the more common format where you might not have an owner occupancy, that it might be a managed property rather than owned.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions, Mayor Pro Tem?
The one that caught my eye was under adult use. And this is page 143 of the packet. At the top of the page, adult motion picture theater. And without reading the entirety of this, the last clause says, includes any hotel or motel, boarding house, rooming house, or other lodging for transient customers. And it seems weird to me that we would include that. And I'm interested in knowing why that's included in adult-oriented businesses when it deals with lodging. And maybe I just don't have an active enough imagination or enough life experience to fully explain that.
Yeah, so the adult uses are ones where we just repeated your current definition. So I don't have a particular answer for that, other than you did raise an issue that we probably need to look at if we're some of those other uses we plan on promoting, that perhaps a different term or more explanation is needed for that.
Thank you.
Any further questions from council? All right, Mr. Brewster, back to you.
So I didn't have anything else. Again, these are a lot of the kind of generalized cleanup chapters that we're going to be including in the formal draft. I guess I'll bounce back to the previous slide at chapters 11 and 12. As Brian mentioned, 11 is being worked on the telecommunications, and we have been monitoring the ongoing historic preservation provisions. We know that's a issue that the community's been talking about. There's current sections in your code that we have placeholders for that we want to incorporate here. And there's been a lot of work being done at the staff level and committee level to get a more complete historic preservation chapter. And we've just been monitoring those discussions. So I'll turn it over to either Brian or if someone else was going to speak to that issue.
Sure. So chapter 11, as I mentioned, are telecom ordinances, and those are also, as I mentioned, being revised through the city attorney's office. So what the intention of this code would do is we do anticipate that those will likely be adopted ahead of us. So what we would do is once they're adopted, we would just reformat and incorporate into our code, and then update any references to table numbers or section numbers that may change between now and then. And then chapter 12, we've got Eric Sampson here. He's our Planner 2 and Community Development Department, as well as Cash Parker, the newly elected chair of the Historic Preservation Commission, to answer any questions about the item that they've provided for you. This language was approved by our Historic Preservation Commission, I believe, week before last at our most recent meeting. What it does is it establishes procedures for nominating and designating historical landmarks and historic districts within the city. The ordinance also establishes specific protections for properties that have achieved landmark status, which include requiring your certificate of appropriateness for any construction, alteration, or demolition request to be approved by the commission. And with that, if y'all have any questions about that section, chapter 12, we're here to answer any questions for you.
Perfect. Any questions from council? Member Anderson.
Yeah, thank you. I'm trying to remember back. I believe we had a study session on the historic preservation ordinance a while back. Has anything changed? I think council kind of came down on that in that we didn't want to allow someone else to impose historical status on a building. Has anything in those any in that kind of category of things changed that we had previously discussed? No. Okay. That's all I had.
Member Russell.
Thank you. I have a question on B, under procedures for original designation of landmarks and districts, 1D, where it says all landmark nominations shall be accompanied by written consent to the nomination from the owners of the property. In case of a district nomination, a simple majority of property owners within the proposed district shall provide written consent to the nomination. No nomination shall be considered by the commission unless such written consent is provided along with the application. I actually don't think a simple majority is really very fair. We have some areas in the city. Arapahoe Acres is one of them. I think there's another, like a homeowners association type district over in District 2. And they've had covenants in place for a long time. And I really think by allowing a simple majority, it would take very few people to overturn what's been there for years. I think that we probably need to put a supermajority in deciding that, which would be maybe 75% instead of 51%. I would like to see that happen.
Thank you, Member Russell.
Can I ask a question to clarify? So you're saying 75% of the property owners
Yes.
would need to sign any application or supplemental documentation to
Right.
go for the district?
Right.
Anything else, Member Russell?
No.
Member Noonekamp?
Yes, I just wanted to ask a question about what Member Russell just said. Member Russell, are you saying 75% both for the creation of a historic district and then for the dissolving of it?
I think that B1D is not for dissolving it.
So you want to raise the bar to be able to create a historic district,
Yes,
to make it more difficult?
yes.
Okay, that just clarifies. I was trying to understand.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Member Anderson.
I'm actually supportive of that change, supermajority to create a historic district. I think it puts people in a difficult position if 50% of their neighbors can impose regulations on what they can do with their property down the road.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Anyone else? Actually, we'll just weigh in on this aspect of what Member Russell just, I'm sorry, go ahead, Member Russell.
Can I just ask one more question? On that same B1, where it says applications for a nomination for designation as a historic property/landmark, and then it has in quotations landmark. So every time the word landmark appears, does that literally mean the property or a landmark?
So what it generally means is the property structure. So I was looking at the building. I think we had this discussion and Cash, maybe you can weigh in. I know some of our commissioners were talking about, does it mean other items? If someone were to go for designation, I think of a trolley. I think that was the discussion topic. Would it fall under the same category? And I also believe that our deputy city attorney that discussed this said that they pulled this from the model ordinance that was created and really designed this ordinance to match that ordinance, but it would mean all of that.
So it would be either or. If it happened to be a particular property, a house or a trolley or something, it is still included in the landmark description.
Yes,
This was simplifying language. Is that?
Yeah, instead of having to identify every opportunity that we may run into and then missing it because we didn't specifically identify it, they're kind of covered generally under that landmark provision.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. Anyone else want to weigh in on the 75% of property owners for supermajority? Member Noonekamp.
Sure. I just have some questions about what that would look like. So my understanding is that currently it is just a simple majority. Is that correct in our current code?
No, there's actually no provision in the code right now that would actually establish a historic district.
Gotcha. That's very helpful. So there's no historic district provision at all in our code currently? Okay. And if, someone from the 49%, I see that there's a hearing through the Historic Preservation Commission, and then it goes for a hearing to City Council for ultimate decision. Do they have opportunity to appeal the designation if they're in the minority?
Yeah, I do believe there are
Sorry if I'm missing
instructions in here on how to appeal any decision.
Well, if I can weigh in, and is everyone hearing me?
Yes.
Yeah, hi, good evening, I'm Cash Parker. Thank you for letting me appear virtually. I appreciate the opportunity to do that. I'm the chairman of the Historic Preservation Commission, as Brian mentioned. So there's a hearing provision both at the commission level, as you suggested, and also, of course, council has the ultimate decision. But the appeal from council's decision is judicial appeal from that point, is my recollection of how this is structured, like there would be for other decisions by council. But yes, I mean, with that hearing process, anyone who was objecting to the designation, including the minority or the 25%, if this gets changed to a supermajority, would have that opportunity to appeal and, well, to be heard and then ultimately to appeal. And I'll add too that the percentage for designation of a historic district was the matter of a lot of debate within the Historic Preservation Commission. As Member Anderson alluded to, this project in our commission dates back before the Code Next project started. There's been at least one, maybe two other study sessions with council about it. So we've tried to go back and incorporate all the feedback we've gotten from council, including some folks who are no longer on the council. But it's been a long process, and that was a matter of quite a lot of debate within the commission.
Thank you for that.
All right. Excuse me. I'll weigh in. I would be in support of making this a supermajority as well of 75%. So, anyone else want to weigh in? Member Woodward.
I would be in favor, although I think 75% is a awfully high number. I'm thinking 2/3 or something like that, something a little less, but 3 out of 4 is a really difficult number.
Thank you, Member Woodward. Member Noonkamp?
Yeah, I agree with Member Woodward. I am open to an increase, but not going all the way to 75%.
Thank you, Member Noonkamp. It sounds like we're in favor at least of having that number being revised on the final draft. But Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, I think the point is to make it difficult. 75%, you have a pretty good number of citizens who are obviously interested in protecting the district and are willing to tell their neighbors what they can or can't do with the property that their neighbors own. And that's why the standard should be high. When we slap a historic preservation status on a property, that limits what the owner can do with the property. It changes the value of the property to the owner. It benefits the surrounding community, but it has an effect on people who might not agree with it, which is why the 75% standard is important to me.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So I think right now we do have consensus at least on 75%. Obviously, this is not the final draft of this, so we can have further discussion in the next iteration of this. So for now, we'll leave it at 75%. Is there anything else on this topic? All right. So then we'll move on. Anything else on this chapter, Mr. Brewster, Mr. Isham?
No, I don't believe we have any further information to present. The rest of it for everything is just any other discussion or questions amongst council.
Perfect. So I guess we'll just open it back up for the other aspects of this meeting. Anyone else? Member Anderson, I'll let you jump in first.
Thank you, Mayor. I have two primary things here. And again, this isn't in the sign section. It's in, I guess, chapter 4 now with the home-based businesses. But the signs for home-based businesses are allowed to be 1 foot by 1 foot. But then the temporary sign allowance is more than that. I feel like we should make that consistent, allow a home-based business to have a bigger sign, a single sign that's maybe 2 square feet or something like that. A 1 foot by 1 foot sign for home-based business is quite small. So I don't want to see billboards on houses, but something a little bit bigger would be, I think, more better for those people who are running businesses. And this is getting off, again, off subject a little bit, but I don't remember ever discussing home-based businesses. But it seems like if we do end up allowing ADUs, that it makes sense to allow home-based businesses in ADUs. And I believe in our current home-based business law, it's not allowed in any accessory structures. So I would like to open that up as well. So those are two kind of sign/home-based business ideas I have.
Thank you, Member Anderson. So you'd like to bring consistency between home-based and temporary signs?
Yeah.
With the provision that it'd be the bigger of the two, the temporary, correct?
Well, I don't know if that, now that I say it, I don't know if that's quite appropriate. I need to look up that temporary sign allowance again. I don't know if that's too much. I don't,
Mr. Brewster, do you happen to know that off the top of your head? Or Mr. Isom, anyone on the temporary signs within current code?
Yeah. The current one, it'll take me a second, but I can get it. I know on the new one, we've proposed the sign limit to be scaled to the size of lot. So for example, if you only have a 50-foot lot frontage, your maximum sign allowance will be smaller. If you had a 200-foot frontage, as you often might find on a busier street, that's where you're likely to find the larger temporary signs. So those are scaled to the size of the lot. The current ones, I'm trying to pull it up here. And I might give a little bit of an incomplete answer because there's a larger table for temporary signs, and depending on which sign type you are, they're anywhere from 6 square feet to 24 or 32, depending on if you're on a larger lot. And just for your kind of informational purposes, a typical real estate sign, a for sale sign of a home is about anywhere from 4 to 8 square feet, or the common ones are 6.
okay, so I'm seeing the residential temporary signs is 0.18 square feet for every foot of frontage. Well, that's for, okay. Over 100 foot of frontage.
Yeah, and that's the allowance. So it's giving you, so there still may be a maximum size per sign, and under the proposed codes, I'll get to that in a minute here.
That may not be the right. I was just thinking a slightly, you can hardly see a 1 foot by 1 foot sign if a house is set back off the street a ways for a home-based business. So having it be,
right,
18 inches by 18 inches, just something that's a little bigger scale, I think would be appropriate.
And we can definitely look at other cities and how they do that,
Okay.
or even just looking, we can do kind of a visual survey and see what might be appropriate to view from the right of way.
Yeah, and I was just
revise that in the next section.
You see a lot of temporary signs in people's yards that are typically the political signs that are, I don't know what, 18 by 24 inches or something like that.
I think they're like 2 by 4, if I'm remembering correctly. Having to think back a ways, somewhere around there, about 8 square feet per sign. Or the smaller.
Yeah, that's actually a little bit larger than your typical political sign. They're usually 6 for a yard sign is a common one.
Larger in Texas.
Or sometimes 3 as well. But yeah.
Just thinking that size sign resonates with, if people are going to put a political sign in there, they leave all year round, in their yard. Why can't somebody put a, home-based business sign that's that same size attached to their building? It seems like a decent size for something like that.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Russell.
Thank you. Actually, I think political signs would be annoying if they were left in your yard all year long, and that's why they call them.
Oh, they are. They're there all year long.
My neighbor has finally put his in his backyard, so. But political signs are really meant to be temporary signs, and when I first got on city council, you could not put up your signs until September 19th, and then they had to be down just like 6 weeks later. They were temporary. Now, I think some of that's probably been changed, maybe because of the law or the suit with the Supreme Court. But there was discussions on sign size and home-based businesses. Really, when I first got on council, they really didn't like any home-based businesses. And so I don't want the sign to be too big. I mean, and I understand that there is a lady on Dartmouth that sells Mary Kay, and her sign really isn't that big. It's probably about maybe 18 inches long and maybe 6 inches high. I mean, I think when you can get enough with that, I just think we should be careful about making them too big. So, thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. I'll weigh in. I wouldn't be in favor of having as big of a political sign. I'd be open to looking to see what other cities are doing, and then just making a determination at that time whether or not that makes sense. But seeing a political sign for home base, I think that could be just a bit too much, I'm guessing. So, Member Nunkamp.
I'll weigh in. I'm also open to looking at the size. I agree with the mayor. I don't want to go too big, but I am interested to see what others are doing. And I would also be interested, I actually am trying to think of an example that I've seen in a home-based business of a sign. I'm not sure how many examples we have of what this actually ends up looking like in the community, but if we know of any examples that we could visually show, that would be really helpful to get a sense of the scale. But I'm open to seeing options.
I don't know of any off the top of my head, but I'll ask our other staff members. Brooke and John are my resident historians, so they could likely point me in any direction if they exist.
Well, I think you're proving the point, Member Nunkamp, by saying 1 foot by 1 foot is not enough. So, Member Anderson, go ahead.
I see them around because I have a home-based business, so I'm curious about it. So I see what other people do, and typically, yeah, it's a little 1 foot by 1 foot sign by their door. But I was thinking if temporary signs are allowed, there's no reason a home-based business couldn't make a yard sign that has their home-based business. This wouldn't prohibit that. It's just a general temporary sign, right? Am I understanding this code right, Mr. Brewster?
The home-based one could be a permanent sign, I think is what we're saying, if it's associated with the business.
You could also make a temporary one that's much bigger and stick it in your yard.
Yes, correct. And it would just be subject to the rules of how long it can be there and how you move it, because they do have time limits on them.
Okay. Move it to the other side here.
Right. There's ways, or there's the loopholes are certainly possible, and it becomes an enforcement issue.
Member Nunkamp, you still have your light on? Nope. So do we have consensus at looking at what other cities would do with home-based signs? Are we okay with that? I think there was only 3 of us that I heard, but we'll move with consensus in terms of seeing what other cities are doing with that. Any other items that we want to bring up? Member Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor. This is one of the changes I like to see, and it was what Member Russell was referring to in terms of household living. And this is, I don't have the page number in the packet, but Chapter 13, page 24 in the code. A definition of household includes 1 or more persons related by blood, marriage, adoption, or legal guardianship, including foster children together in a dwelling unit, or 2 unrelated persons and their children living together in a dwelling unit. I mean, this is one that's I think for good reason, is violated regularly all over as people live in roommate situations, that kind of thing. A lot of cities are updating these. I'd like to see us go to Denver's model, which is, I believe, 5 unrelated adults, or 5 adults related or unrelated, just 5 adults and their children. Allows roommate situations, allows for household living, but limits the number of roommates you could potentially have.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Russell.
Where, and maybe this question was answered before, where are boarding houses located in our city? I mean, I don't necessarily want to change that, but I mean, if someone decided to buy a house and have roommates to help pay the mortgage, I might be okay with that. But if we start putting up to 5 people in a house, the parking situation is going to be pretty drastic. I mean, it's already that way. And I'm not saying I disagree with what Councilmember Anderson is saying, because I do believe there are people doing that already. And there are people that complain about it, but not a whole lot's being done.
Thank you, Member Russell. I think to your original question, I think only the 2 to 4 exist in I think I wrote this down, 2 to 4 units only in R2s, and there was one other area. What was it, Mr. Brewster? I think you stated it.
Yeah, the 2 to 4 unit boarding house is a use that's listed in your code, and it's currently allowed in R2 and the MUR3 districts by a conditional use permit. And I think it seemed to us, because we're generally in a development code, a boarding house is not limited in two to four rooms. It's usually a larger building. So your definition of that use seems a bit unique. And in our judgment, it seems like it was crafted to specifically get towards the other issue that's been brought up right now, and that's that definition of household. So essentially that 2 to 4 unit boarding house kind of expands the definition of household. So a typical house scale building could have more unrelated boarders. Another way at that would be to change the definition of household, of which yours is restricted to the definition that was read, two unrelated people and their children living together. And that's low on the spectrum. Communities are usually in the 2 to 4 range in our experience, although some have been pushing that even further. I don't doubt that Denver's is 5, as was stated.
Thank you for that, Mr. Brewster. Actually, Member Anderson, can you repeat that again? Was 5 adults?
Five adults and their children. I mean, and that's what Denver's is, and according to my understanding.
Right.
It would be, the idea is to allow for a family plus, a couple of other people if it's a larger house or something like that, or just a roommate situation of up to 5 people. And I think this is one where, right now in our code with 2 unrelated people, you couldn't even, like a married couple couldn't rent out a room to a friend in their basement, or if there was somebody on the edge who was on the edge of homelessness, you couldn't say, hey, come and stay with us. We have room for you for a couple of months. So I think this would allow it to open it up to just a much higher variety of living circumstances, which is kind of the age we live in. People don't, this isn't we aren't living in the 50s anymore. That is not standard, standard normal families living in most of our houses. It's a variety of different living situations, which is why I think you see this one regularly violated. I think perhaps there may be, legal ramifications for overly restrictive household definition too, but I wouldn't want to ask the city attorney to weigh in on the spot.
Thank you, Member Anderson. I'll pass it over to Member Noonekamp.
Thank you, Mayor. I support this change. I would move household up to 5 members. I have lived in a house where there were 5 roommates when I was in my early 20s and I was in grad school, and we lived in a neighborhood where we, took care of the house and the lawn and knew our neighbors and invested in community, but it also enabled several of us who were living on a single income at the time to go to school and work and build a life for ourselves in our early 20s. And so I think that this type of allowance in our communities is important, especially as we think about how we ensure people can afford to live in the community. I do think if we make this change, I would actually just remove the limited boarding house definition from within our code. Really, the 5+ rooms feels more like what we would consider a boarding house right now. 2 to 4, I do think is antiquated just based on how people are living right now. And so I think we could remove that and just have the larger where it could be either owner occupied or you could have a resident manager.
Thank you, Member Noonekamp. I'll weigh in. I'm in favor of increasing the amount. I'm not sure if 5 is right. Trying to figure out why 5 and not 4, but I'm open to having that discussion in the future in terms of just raising that limit. I was surprised by this when this was first brought up months ago during this initial discussion, that we're limited to just 2 unrelated persons, because for the comments that Member Anderson and Member Noonekamp stated, it seems abnormal, at least in this day and age, in terms of not having 2 other roommates. So anyone else? We have 3 at the moment. So Member Woodward?
Yeah, I think 5 is a high number for Inglewood. I understand it for Denver. 4 plus children is a reasonably high number for me, and I could go along with that. But 5, I think, is too high for most of the houses in Inglewood. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Woodward. Mayor Pro Tem and then Member Anderson.
Honestly, I think if we're going to solve affordability problems in Inglewood, this is one of the ways to do it. Getting people the opportunity to get a house outside of their parents' house in a boarding house with other adults is utilizing the existing stock with minimal disruption to the neighborhoods surrounding those people. I think this is a good public policy and one that I can support. So I would go with 5.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Anderson.
I actually don't need to weigh in anymore.
Perfect. So there's consensus on that. Anything else from anything we've discussed tonight? Member Anderson.
I do think, just to circle back to this, it does make the 2 to 4 room boarding house totally superfluous. So I'd eliminate that.
I'm in agreement with that as well, if that's the ultimate change. So, but I would be in favor of that if that's the direction we decide to go. Anything else from members of council? All right, anything else from staff?
No, sir.
Were we clear enough there? I have my notes, so if you need to see them, I could definitely provide them, but. All right, well, I think that covers that aspect tonight. Mr. Brewster, Mr. Parker, thank you for joining us. I see you're still online. Thank you for your time tonight. And staff, Mr. Sampson, Mr. Isom, thank you very much for all your help on this and staying here in the late hour. Everyone have a good evening.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks. Good night.
All right, everyone, we are now moving on to agenda item 10, and this is actually a motion to approve a contract with Elite Industries to provide construction service to improve the park amenities at Bates Logan for $703,339.36. We have our Deputy Director, Brad Anderson, as well as Open Space Manager, Adrian Torres. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Adrian Torres, who is our Open Space Manager. He will have all the details for you about this project. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thanks for having us back tonight. I'm lucky because I get to share the fun, exciting stuff. So we're excited to share some upgrades for Bates Logan with you tonight. In July of 2022, the Parks, Rec, Library, and Golf Department was awarded a $500,000 grant from Arapahoe County Open Space for Phase 1 of Bates Logan. The primary components of this phase are constructing a new restroom and pavilion. Some of our goals for this phase are to improve the infrastructure at the park by replacing the restroom and pavilion to provide a common area for guests to gather, socialize, play, and improve access to all of our users. We issued a solicitation and received 2 proposals. Elite Industries was the lower of the 2. You can see the total cost for Phase 1 here and where the funds are coming from. This is the overview of the major components of the project. The new restroom, you'll see on the left, it kind of sits where the current restroom is. The new enhanced plaza area kind of curves around the slope there, if you're familiar with Bates, and the new shelter is more towards the basketball court. The basketball court will stay, but it kind of goes in that direction if you're familiar with Bates. We're hoping that bringing them together will give us a more centralized gathering area for the park. This is a picture of the new pavilion we're going to get at Bates. It'll have 5 tables and it'll be reservable, much like the current one we have there. This is the new restroom. It's the Dakota model from CTX, and it'll have 2 stalls on each side. So thank you for your time tonight. We're excited to bring these new amenities to Bates Logan. And do you have any questions for us?
Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Torres. We'll kick it off with questions for Mr. Woodward.
Yeah, does the shelter have electrical outlets in it or any other amenities such as barbecue grills or anything like that?
Yes, it does.
Okay, thank you.
Member Anderson?
Is the, anything that's existing being demoed, or is this just an addition to the park?
Another couple pieces of this project will be the demo of the current shelter. And we're going to relocate the water line that provides the potable water to the restroom.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Member Noonekamp?
It's exciting to see all of these park updates coming throughout the city, slowly but surely, one at a time. My question is, regarding the design, are you approaching this for consistency so that all the parks have similar design features, or is every park really unique and you're deciding what the design features are for that one in particular?
Yes and no. The restrooms and the shelters will be consistent, and the playgrounds will be different themes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Torres, I guess questions for me. So playground's going to stay, so it's going to be in its current location. There's still plans, or at least in the coming years, about updating the park itself, correct?
Correct. I'll be coming with you guys hopefully soon for Phase 2 grant, which will do the playground. That'll be just to the east, north and east of this area, kind of where the basketball court is.
And then the basketball court is supposed to move as well to where the current playground is at, if I remember what the design
Correct.
looked like, right? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And then I guess second question, would those restrooms be open during the winter months? I know that part of the issue today is, I guess the pipes themselves would freeze. Are we going to have a similar situation with this new setup?
Yes.
So we would still have like a porta potty or whatever during the winter months at the park, as we currently do. Okay. All right. And I guess last question, what is the timeline for getting this installed? I know it was the summer months, but.
Hopefully we'll be finished by the fall.
Okay.
I mean, there's some delays, as you guys know, with our shelters and playgrounds and stuff like that. So, but it's targeted for this fall.
Okay.
To be completed.
Thank you, Mr. Torres. Any further questions from council? If not, can I get a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve.
Second.
Thank you, Member Woodward, and thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Any further comments? Seeing none, can we please vote?
Member Anderson?
Aye.
Member Noonekamp?
Aye.
Member Russell?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ward?
Aye.
Member Woodward?
Aye.
Mayor Sierra?
Aye.
Let the record show 6 ayes.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for the presentation.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to the next item, we have the golf cart purchase. So it's Council Bill 12. The City of Inglewood Parks, Rec, Library, and Golf is seeking an approval for the procurement of 70 new club car golf cars in 2024 from Colorado Golf and Turf by entering into a 5-year lease agreement through 2028 for a total contract amount of $357,194. Here we have Golf Superintendent Jeremiah Stump and Golf Manager Shannon. How do you pronounce? Oh no,
It's me again.
it's you.
So you have me
You're back
again.
again, Director Underhill. I can pronounce your name.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to bring this to you, and Jeremiah's got a lot of details to share with you on getting a new fleet of golf carts for Broken T. And this is a revenue generator, so even the dollar amount is kind of high, we actually generate quite a bit of revenue from people renting our golf carts. So I'll turn it over to Jeremiah.
Perfect. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for your time this evening. Today, the golf staff is seeking approval to enter into a 5-year lease to purchase of 70 new electric club car golf carts. I want to stress this is a lease to purchase. We will own these at the end of the lease. Where's the clicker at? Thank you. All right, so little background. Broken T in 2022, we brought in $2.65 million in revenue. So 18% of that revenue is off of the golf cart fleet rental. So it is a revenue generator for us. Now, due to supply chain issues, we're in a tough spot right now. The past agreement was we were supposed to receive 36 new golf carts over the past 2 years, and then next year as well. And we don't have any because they weren't able to produce those for us. So this has left us with an aging fleet that we aren't able to repair in a reasonable amount of time to provide our patrons the experience they expect. Now, in 2022, we spent $23,000. This is not including our labor to keep these carts running for the season, to keep them acceptable for our patrons. I expect that to be at least that this year if we continue down the same path. So at the end of the day, Broken T Golf Course, our main goal is to provide an excellent experience at a great value for our patrons. The cart fleet is a very important piece of this puzzle. So a brief explanation here on the Omnia partner contract. So they do all the negotiating for us, which then guarantees us the best available pricing, quality, and service. The total cost of the contract includes $108,000 trade-in value for the existing fleet, and also rentals of 36 lithium-ion golf cars to replace the 36 old ones that we have been piecing together the last few years. So this alone, this is part of the package, is them providing these carts for us. And this alone will help reduce our costs in 2023. So we did an extensive cost analysis, and we recommend entering into a 5-year lease to purchase. Because we didn't receive the golf carts the last 2 years plus next year, we have $150,000 saved in the bank as a down payment. So when we enter into this lease, we're going to pay, $150,000 upfront. And then our yearly expenditure then looks like $41,439, which falls in line with our past and current budget of approximately $50,000 a year for our cart fleet that we've been using the last 5 years, and also it's projected out for the next 5 years, so it fits into our budget. The lease to purchase does not have a prepayment penalty, and we all feel like it's very likely we're going to be able to pay these off much sooner, which would save some interest. At the end of the day, we know that purchasing them up front would be the cheapest way to go. But we just got done spending $1.8 million on an irrigation renovation. And we just didn't, this isn't budgeted. We didn't really expect the supply chain issues that we've had. We didn't expect that, so. A couple of things why this is such an urgent, I do appreciate you guys fitting us in tonight. So, so on March 15th, we are actually getting GPS units for the golf carts. So the golfers will have a screen that will tell them yardage and yardage, so that you don't have to have carry a rangefinder around with you or your phone. And so we have this scheduled to be installed on March 15th, and we have the vendor, Colorado Golf and Turf, teed up to produce those 36 carts that they're going to rent us for the next year or so, to deliver them to deliver them before that March 15th date, so that we can get everything installed and we'll be ready to go for the golf season. One of these days the weather's gonna get nice, it'll stop snowing. So New golf cart fleet has a lead time of about a year out right now. So that's also the urgency to go along with this is we order them now. We're looking at about a year from now is when we would receive the new fleet. So, and then also just cost. I mean, like I explained, we're spending a lot of our shop manager Brian is spending a lot of time fixing old carts, and we're throwing money at that. So, here's some pictures here of some of our current conditions. You can see on the left we have an Easy Go. We have 36 of those. And then on the center there is a Yamaha. We have 36 of those. Some of them don't have windshields. Some of them, the windshields are in pretty bad shape, as you can see there in the middle. And then mechanically, there's a lot of brake issues and tires, and there's a lot of maintenance on these. So here's a picture. We haven't picked out, we haven't really talked about color or anything yet. This is just a picture of what they could look like. This is a 2024 Club Car Tempo lead acid electric golf cart. Now why Club Car? One of the big things with them is a 4-year battery and parts warranty. With the fleet purchase, they come out weekly to do warranty claims, warranty and make repairs. That's for the full warranty period, so for the next 4 years. This is a big one. We actually had a golf cart that is still down right now. It's been down for 18 months because we weren't able to get an electric motor for it, one of our existing ones. Colorado Golf and Turf is required to keep $20 million in inventory. That's about 20 miles west of here. And so they have, what's going to break, they're going to have. So if hopefully nothing breaks, but and for patron experience, we've got, sand bottle holders, a ball and a club cleaner, and also a cooler to carry a 6-pack. So, thank you for your time. Does anybody have any questions?
And I'll just add real fast, our revenue from 2022 on golf cart rentals, and this is the old fleet, was over $473,000. So we will hopefully pay this off very quickly.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much for the presentation. Member Anderson.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. My question is just, it sounds like this is a financial winner, but is the money actually coming out of the enterprise fund, or is this coming from the general fund? Okay. Thank you. Good.
Member Woodward.
Yeah, I figure that's $85 a month per cart over the term, which should be a pretty good deal, especially on 12 months, which we don't have this year for cart usage, but some years we do. Question for the batteries, how long does it take to charge a battery?
So typically we plug them in at the end of the day and they charge overnight. It's about 8 hours.
8 hours. So if you had a tournament or something like that using a lot of carts and they came in at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, would you have enough, do you have enough carts and are you able to charge them to go out again?
So they would do 2 rounds. They'd be able to do 2 rounds of fully charged battery, especially, we're not in the mountains or anything. So we'd be able to get around twice for that.
Okay, great, good. Good, that's all I have, thank you.
Member Newnham.
Thank you for the presentation and ultimately for bringing us something that's going to keep our patrons safer. The safety issue is the biggest concern for me right now. There were 36 carts that we ordered that were never fulfilled. I'm assuming no money was exchanged. We didn't pay for anything. We're not expecting reimbursement. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any further questions from council? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve Council Bill 12?
I move to approve Council Bill 12.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Could I get a second?
Second.
Thank you, Member Newnham. Any further comments? Seeing none, can we please vote?
Member Anderson?
Aye.
Member Newnham?
Aye.
Member Russell?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ward?
Aye.
Member Woodward?
Aye.
Mayor Sierra?
Aye.
The record shows 6 ayes.
Thank you both for the presentation tonight and have a good evening. And moving on to the last agenda item for the night, we have Director Van Rye here to talk about a contract for the award of services with CNL Water Solutions for the 2023 valve replacement project in the amount of $1,159,000, including approval to execute any change orders to expend 20% staff managed contingency of $231,800 for a total project authorization of $1.390 million. Good evening, Director.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Almost as exciting as golf carts, valves. That's what I'm going to present on today. So we have a number of valves in our system, and we have finally gotten to the point where we're setting up a programmatic approach to replacing those valves. And so what this contract is before you today is to do the first round of 57 inoperable valves that we have in our system. You can see where they are in the map there. They're basically spread throughout the entire city. We're doing this in conjunction with another contract that's being issued that's an exercise program. So the exercising is to go in and turn the valves on a routine basis. Our goal is ultimately to get to a point where every valve is operated on a 3-year cycle. So we get through the whole system every 3 years. But the problem is several of these valves haven't been operated in a decade or more. And so what happens is they freeze up. We'll break the nut off them. They'll break, they won't close. And it creates problems when, especially when we're trying to fix a line break, because if they can't get the valve to close, then they have to go back farther, and then they might have to go down 2 branches to ultimately get to the point where we can isolate the system. And so tonight I'm bringing before you a contract for replacing these first 57. So we went out to for an RFP in December on this. We had 3 responses, and we ultimately landed on CNL Water Solutions. And if you look at the table below, you can say they weren't the lowest. However, the challenge with our second Black Eagle Energy Services is right now we have our line replacement project with them that we issued to them 9 months ago, and it still hasn't started. So we're working with them. First, it was an issue with staffing, then it became an issue with supply chain. So our experience with CNL Water Solutions, which is one of our on-call repair contractors, has been much more responsive. And so we ultimately landed on CNL Water Solutions because we haven't gotten the service that we've expected out of Black Eagle Energy Services yet. Now, we still want to give them a chance on the contract that they have, and hopefully they'll figure it out and get it to the point where we can actually work with them in the future. But with the size of this and the critical nature of executing this project to get these valves replaced, we ultimately felt the better approach was to go with CNL Water Solutions, since it's more reliable in terms of getting our needs met. And so ultimately, that's the request tonight.
Very succinct, Director Van Rye.
I know, it's new for me.
You're on a streak. Any questions from council? Member Russell, I see your mic is on, but nope. Mayor Pro Tem.
So this is a new program for us. The exercising of valves and the replacement of valves that are broken. Do you have any insight as to why that was not a priority in the past?
Best we can tell is it was more of an ad hoc approach. So I think this goes back to the minimal investment approach with the system is fix it when it breaks, but if it doesn't break, don't touch it. And so what you see with this really came out of the master planning process. So the master plan identified programs that modern utilities utilize to stay ahead of things so that we can actually plan for systems and not be in a reactive mode. This actually gets us that programmatic approach, which is part of the reason why we raised the rates and have asked for more investment in the water system, is so that we can do this type of work.
And I assume that these valves are valves that would not otherwise be covered by upcoming main replacements that we're already doing?
That's correct. They are not in coincidence with other main projects.
Great, thank you.
Any further questions from council? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the award of contract services to CNL?
So moved.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you, Member Noonan-Camp. Any further comments? Seeing none, can we please vote?
Member Anderson?
Aye.
Member Nunekamp?
Aye.
Member Russell?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ward?
Aye.
Member Woodward?
Aye.
Mayor Sierra?
Aye.
Let the record show, 6 ayes.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Director.
Thank you.
All right, and now we're moving on to council members' choice. I guess I can start off. First off, I want to thank Mayor Pro Tem for leading the meeting last Tuesday night. Unfortunately, he may have to do it again this coming Monday. I'll know for sure tomorrow. I will be at the meeting. I may have to join remotely, but I'll know tomorrow, and I'll let Mayor Pro Tem know, I guess on Wednesday morning's mayor-manager's meeting. But I will be in attendance at the very least remotely, but hopefully I could be here in person for the public hearing of Sam's Automotive, so it would be a big one. Secondly, I will be, let me see, I want to get this right, but I'll be speaking with other mayors during the South Metro Chamber in Lone Tree with the mayor of Lone Tree, Centennial, I think Council Pines is there as well, Littleton, myself, and I'm missing one, it feels like. There's 6 mayors. Well, I'm missing someone else. Greenwood Village. So we'll be just discussing just an update to the South Metro caucus. So that's going to be starting at 7 a.m. I believe we start speaking at 7:30. It'll go on for about an hour and 15, something like that. So that would be coming up this coming Friday if anyone wants to join. And lastly, I want to thank Member Anderson and Member Nunekamp for staging a town hall regarding just some of the attainable housing discussions we've been having. I'm going to be holding my own. I haven't set a date yet, but it's going to be the week of the 13th or the week of the 20th. Actually, it'll be both of those weeks. I want to have as many discussions as possible. So I'll be coordinating times, and I'll be providing those either through email or through social media. I'll figure out a way to get the word out, but I will be hosting those with those 2 weeks on the 13th and the 20th at the very least. So anyone else for council members' choice? Member Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I wanted to thank citizens who came out to the town hall on Thursday with myself and Councilmember Nunekamp. We had really good feedback and helpful feedback. Some people who disagreed, of course, but it was a good discussion overall, and just a good group of people that were there attending. I would like to also hold more and may coordinate with the mayor or other council members as the time approaches, but I'll let the mayor get his on the calendar first before I try to do another one separately. And then I did have one, I think this is going to need to be a council request, but we have the this is kind of on Prop 123. I know staff has been studying that a little bit. I believe there's a requirement that cities are growing their affordable housing stock by 3% a year or something like that. I just wanted to make sure that the affordable housing things that we're working on in Code Next are contributing towards that, or if there are other things we need to consider to make sure we're getting close to that 3%, or any other requirements we need to be able to access those the funds in Prop 123. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Just wanted to let everyone know that I submitted my registration, or rather Krista submitted my registration for CML today. I do intend to actually stay at the hotel for that event, which is in Aurora, but for logistical reasons, I would like to stay at the hotel. So if there is a majority of council that objects to that idea, then I will make other plans. Typically within 50 miles, we don't allow staff to stay at a hotel, and I would like to disclose that. But again, CML is a pretty packed event, and I would like to be fresh in the morning and well rested at night, not worrying about a commute every day during the course of that event.
No objections from you, Mayor Pro Tem. I'm not sure if anyone has any objections to that. Don't see any, so silence is golden. So anything else, Mayor Pro Tem?
Got every 2 weeks for the indefinite future, we'll be meeting with the statewide Region 9, rather, opioid task force. I'm leading the work group on co-responders. We're expecting to have a representative from the sheriff's office. I learned that the sheriff's office has a co-responder program that serves their constituents, largely in Centennial. Centennial does a large amount of funding for that. So we're looking towards a more regional approach as a group to try to figure out, instead of setting up a new co-responder program, since so many local areas in the region have co-responder programs existing, how best can we coordinate between those things? So that's kind of what we're focused on now. I'll have more reports forthcoming on that. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Woodward.
Thank you. I'm also going to apply for registration on CML, and I had exactly the same thought of staying there as opposed to trying to fight traffic and try and make meetings on time and that sort of thing out there. So I'm looking at pretty much the same plan as Mayor Pro Tem Ward is. So if I could get approval on that once I've applied and Krista's got the numbers, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Actually, Member Woodward, I do object to you being, no, actually, I'm joking. No objections on my side, so. Anything else, Member Woodward? Anyone else tonight for Council Member's Choice? Seeing none, moving on to City Manager's Choice.
No report.
Perfect. And with that, everyone, we are adjourned. See you all Monday night. Have a good evening.